What is happening out there, Roto Scouts football fans? Happy Saturday, gang. Anybody who's out there within the sound of my voice. Not sure how many people are going to be here for this one, but we finally made it happen. We're on live Saturday afternoon, 2 p.m. as promised or thereabouts, talking about a main slate of football on DraftKings and FanDuel. Let me actually kick out a notification on Twitter. I'm just realizing I did not actually do that. What's the easiest way to do that now? Bear with me one sec. Hopefully your guys' Saturday is going well. Like I said, you promised to be somewhere between noon and 2, and I think all of you who know me pretty well by now probably figured that we were going to be closer to 2 o'clock than to noon. Got a lot done, though. Had to cover the baseball slate this morning. Slept from somewhere around 7:30, 8 o'clock this morning to about 11. Got up, worked on the baseball slate, updated football, and now here we are. Spent all of last night, literally from the lock. Well, that's not entirely true. The baseball slate locked at 7-something. I walked down the street to the supermarket. I picked up some dinner, came back. I made dinner. I ate dinner. Took about an hour 20. And then from that point on, I was in this chair typing 20 some odd thousand words, breaking this slate down, probably in greater detail than we're going to do on this show, because that would take way too long. But like 8-ish hours overnight last night, covering this football slate, putting together the groups, the optimizer article, the game notes, detailed game notes up on the website for anybody who's subscribed at rotoscouts.com. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears go into that one. So please give that optimizer groups article a click. I think it'll be well worth your time as far as just catching up. Forgot I had to mute that. As far as catching up on every single piece of the main slate, I got into everybody that we projected essentially outside of down depth chart guys who were pulling under a point total. But otherwise, if he's playing, he's covered on that breakdown. Let me just tweet out real quick. Live right now. Down on the NFL DFS main slate, DraftKings and FanDuel. Catching all these keywords is so annoying. Just having to constantly say like NFL DFS on DraftKings and FanDuel. Like, so annoying. Come hang out. Yeah, good enough. All right, that's out in the wild. So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of games. Let's see how this actually looks. It's a busy dashboard, I know. It's not as nice and tidy as our MLB dashboard, unfortunately. A lot of numbers just kind of staring you in the face there. I'll get some conditional formatting and maybe shape it up a little bit, try and make it look a little prettier. I was trying to think of different ways to lay things out. It's just kind of a broad group of stats here to get through. Outside of, I do have individual positional tabs with some different data on them, but I don't love breaking it down that way. I'd rather have everybody kind of sitting here staring us in the face. So we'll go through what each of the columns are. A lot of information to digest here, and we'll get this cleaned up as we go forward. But let's say hi to some people. Anthony Taylor's here. Swoosh bang. What's going on, buddy? Swoosh saying, need a lineup to take down my 20-man tourney tomorrow. We'll definitely talk about a lot of high-end pieces. I think the best place to get us started is I'll probably sort us down to the quarterbacks, and then we'll filter to the quarterbacks, and then we'll sort by quarterback ranking and kind of talk about that real quick as a high-level view of the slate. Talk about that along with the Vegas totals, the matchups, and the stack rankings. And then that just kind of informs the rest of the slate. So we'll come across some definite lineup builds, some sleeper value plays, some top end obvious dudes like, I don't know, Josh Allen, Saquon Barkley, Lamar Jackson, all at the top of the board. Those are the top 3 projected players on your DraftKings slate. Saquon, and just insuppressible monster projection this week on the back of some PPR scoring on that site. Highly projected on FanDuel, but stands out on the DraftKings slate at the top of the board there. A couple other big skill players not too far behind. So looks like a good one. I'm excited to talk this through, and we'll see how long we go. If you've been here before, you know that we can get deep into these things and go for quite a while. I'm going to try and get us out at a reasonable time, though. I'm playing the baseball slate. Got to stay on top of updating baseball lineups a little bit later on. But I think a reasonably long show is in the works here. Welcome to New York's worst drivers dash cam videos. What's going on? I'm over here now, he says. Welcome. Don't know if you're new, if you're just joining us, or if you're just walking in the door and under a new screen name there, but welcome. Welcome to everybody else. Greg B. Cohen is out there. Anthony Tiz. Good to see everybody. Cujo's saying, have a good show. We'll catch it later. Appreciate you, buddy. If you're hearing this right now or later on, Cujo's always one of the first ones in the door and big supporter. And hopefully you have good luck this week, buddy. Anyway, let's kind of dig into this thing. So, as promised, and let me know as I filter through, comment in the video there, just like how visible things are on this board. I could do some zooming and like cut the board down size-wise and then just have to scroll back and forth. But ideally, I think this gets everything at least onto your screen. And then as we cut by position, it becomes a little bit more sane, hopefully. Oh, New York's worst driver's dash cam videos is legalized. Okay, that explains a lot. Now I connect the videos that you've posted in Discord before and all of that stuff. Now I get it. What's going on, bud? Good to see you. Greg B. Cohen has some Arizona stack with Kyler, and he's not happy about it. I think it's a playable spot. I don't love it, but we'll get into it. He's a few spots down the board here. Sip of coffee to get us started here. And let's dig into this thing. So how visible is all of that to you guys? On my screen, it looks all right, but I don't know exactly how it's coming through to your end on the YouTube side. We'll filter this by DraftKings point rankings among the quarterbacks. And there's a little bit of difference back and forth. There's a bigger difference in the value rankings columns, as you can see, just the points per dollar dependent rankings. We've got a lot of interesting spots. Lot to work with. Legalizes on his phone, so that's a bit small. Yeah, I can understand why on the phone it'll be a little bit small. Yeah, if you got to zoom in, I'll talk you through all of the numbers that are on the screen here anyway. But yeah, I can see on the phone that would be a little bit small. Apologies for that. I didn't think about phone viewing. I was thinking everybody, you guys, giant screen TVs and stuff for this show. So no surprises, Lamar, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow up toward the top of the board, 1, 2, 3 in the quarterback rankings by points. Reasonable for value. Those guys are going to be expensive, so you expect them to knock down a little bit by value. Lamar just flat 1 across the board at a monster slate leading projection on both sites, though. Point per dollar doesn't really factor into the equation. He's leading stack number 3 in the overall stack rankings by points on both sites, and the Ravens pulling a pretty fair amount of value as the second highest FanDuel value stack. On DraftKings, they pull a 9th rated value, but that beats out like the Bills, Josh Allen leading the 17th rated stack by value, and only 10th by scoring potential. Allen threw monster 4 touchdowns in the first game. He threw for 394 yards in that performance. He threw 2 touchdowns. He ran in another 2. He was responsible for 4 scores. But that team does take a little bit of a hit in the aggregate. They really lack a star presence when it comes to the skill player positions, and that knocks them down a slight peg, whereas if they had a Jamar Chase type receiver, it would keep them slightly higher ranked. Remember, there's not a ton of separation when we aggregate the fantasy points, especially among the top end teams. So you're seeing minimal separation between some of these. Joe Burrow leading stack number 1 across the board. He comes in as QB3 by FanDuel points and DraftKings points, reasonably rated 6th by value, 2nd by value across sites. More interesting maybe on FanDuel, just given that slightly better value mark. 8,000 on that slate is a reasonable price, 66 on DraftKings. Burrow had a terrible week 1. That entire Bengals team just really disappointed. But you can see the clear path to success in what could be a decent shootout against Jacksonville. I'm really, really hoping that Jacksonville holds up their end of that game. And that should make all things right for Joe Burrow. And that stack number, that rating at number 1 there, right here in the middle, is driven largely by the presence of just extreme upside skill players that go along with the very high-end quarterback. So he gains ground by having good players in his stack, where Josh Allen gets shaved down slightly when we compare his quarterback points ranking to where the stack comes in. Just some wrinkles. Just as a layout I know I mentioned at the beginning that I made a big deal out of, in fact, telling you guys what was where, and I don't think I actually did that. Obviously, players, salary data, positioning all over here. DraftKings points in green, FanDuel points in blue, matchup information. These are your player positional rankings. So you've got DraftKings points, DraftKings value, followed by FanDuel points, FanDuel value. Same deal on the stacks. This is the aggregate stack rankings. The way that I do that is I take the quarterback and then I take the top 3 projected skill players from his team. Sometimes you'll have another guy that does hit the board and should be somewhat factored in that could weight things slightly differently. But typically it's the top 3 skill players that really set the bar for where these stacks are going to fall and really pick up the lion's share of the projections, as you guys know. So I think that's a fair way to do it. And I get the aggregate points, and then I get the points per dollar value rating. And I just rank those against one another. And then just we're getting into season-long stats across the board. These are the opposing defensive stats. Pressure rating, sacks, interceptions. This is currently just 1 week data. Yards per rush attempt, yards per pass attempt with the ranking at which those numbers sit. Snap share, obviously the quarterbacks for the most part outside of Tua, 100% snap shares. I didn't fix Mahomes because you don't really need to. Passing stats for the QBs will be focused here during the quarterback discussion. A little bit over here for the rushing stats. And then we've got rushing, targeting, and receiving stats across the board here. Pretty straightforward. Nothing crazy. Again, went a little bit deeper with some, just pulling in some, route win rates and numbers like that when I wrote up the article. And that's one of the reasons that thing takes so goddamn long. So there's only just so much that we can fit on this screen. So a lot of the times when we're doing the shows, we're talking a little bit more, thin slice, top level type stuff, the basic stats. And then we dig in a little bit more. The projections are fueled by a little bit more advanced stuff. And we can dig in the article space a little bit more on some of the advanced stuff. Yeah, I agree, Legalized. I'm hoping that we get away with a little bit lower on Joe Burrow than what he ought to be in a great spot against Jacksonville with a slate leading game total. Really digging that spot for a monster bounce back for Cincy. I don't think it's a secret. I think he's going to draw plenty of ownership, and so will his key skill players. But I do think he goes a little bit underappreciated for that spot. Running through the Vegas board, I'm realizing that I didn't update the Vegas board in the file here, so I'll just read it through. But starting up at the top, Seahawks and the Steelers, the surprising Steelers from week 1. Just a 40.5 point total in that one. The Steelers at home favored by 3 points. Of course, these are in different order. That's so annoying. That's a 21.75 implied total for the Steelers, 18.75 on the other side of that one for the Seahawks. Sammy Darnold didn't exactly stand out in his Seahawks debut, while Aaron Rodgers just was utterly shocking in his Steelers debut. That weird performance by Rodgers, Justin Fields on the other side of that game going off as the only Sunday afternoon game to hit the over out of the entire slate when it came in the door as the lowest implied total of the week. Just stunning across the board. Monster quarterback performances from those two, and then monster quarterback performance from Daniel Jones, plus all the Joe Random guy touchdowns that we got in week 1. Just created total chaos on that week 1 slate. I think we get a cleaner board this week in week 2, get some reps in and everything, a little bit of growth week over week. The first week tends to be a little bit ugly. Players who didn't, participate much in camp, didn't play in the preseason, so on and so forth. I do expect the Steelers to kind of come back to earth in this one, though. Not that the Seahawks are going to be out there really shutting them down, but I just don't really see a ton for Aaron Rodgers, and that just doesn't look like a good offense. They didn't really got much going on the ground. Limited. The Rams at the Titans, a 41 point total in that one. Rams favored by 5.5 on the road against a very gettable Titans team that looked incredibly bad on offense. They've got all the pieces you would need to succeed outside of maybe what the quarterback looks like right now. Just did not look ready. But a good receiving core, decent running back. There are skill player options on the Titans. And then the Rams stand pretty tall. They're one of the higher overall rated stacks of the week. A lot of scoring potential in that lineup with a couple big play wide receivers, a volume dependent independent big running back to work with, and a veteran quarterback with an ouchy kind of a back. Definitely going to live and die in stacks with how Stafford does in that game, but the cards are definitely set up in their favor. The Rams drawing a 23.25 point implied total to 17 and 7.5 on the other side. Bears and the Lions could be an interesting one. Obviously, we want to come down on the Lions side of that one, favored by 6.5 in a home game. 46.5 point total for the game puts it up near the top of the board. Lions drawing a 26.5 point total. Bears on the other side, just 20 points. But obviously, they were frisky in week one. There's a little bit of talent across the board in terms of the wide receiver pool. Running backs are going to be a little bit of a question. You've got Swift there, but I've never been a big fan. A little bit of depth in terms of who might come up the depth chart. But they're another team. They're going to live and die by how Caleb throws the ball. And that wasn't overly pretty outside of a Roma Dunze touchdown in week one. But plenty of quality there to work with. And then the Lions, just one of the top overall DFS teams up and down the depth chart. High-end quarterback. A couple of excellent wide receiver options. Ridiculously strong two-headed running back situation that actually tends to work out well. One of the few. And a primo tight end. So, love the upside for Detroit. Easy enough to get to. The Browns and the Ravens. A ridiculous 11.5 point spread in that one. Ravens big favorites at home. 44.5 point total there. Obviously, Lamar standing very tall up at the top of the board. The Ravens as a stack rate out very strongly against what should be a pretty much of a pushover opponent. 28 point implied total for Baltimore. Just 16.5 on the other side of that one. Giants and the Cowboys rivalry game here. Cowboys favored by 5.5 in a home game in Dallas. 44.5 point total. All things Cowboys fire away. There is nothing appealing about the New York Giants other than Malik Neighbors. He is the only thing you want from that team. Running game sucks. Offensive line sucks. Quarterback sucks. There is nothing appealing. They don't have any depth at receiver. They don't have a good tight end. It is a garbage team with a bad defense. Dallas should be able to exploit that defense. Should be a big day for Dak and his teammates. And I'm not even playing the reverse jinx there. I just think my Giants suck. Big opportunity for Dallas in a get-right spot. The Bills and the Jets. Bills favored by 6.5 on the road in New York. 47.5 point total there. Appealing spot on the Bills side for sure, even though they rate down the board a little bit, as I was saying, on the back of some weaker skill players than other teams. They've got Josh Allen to lead the way. He was tremendous in week one, put up a monster score, and he can drag some scoring along with him for the ride. So Bill stack's very much in play, but that Jets defense is high-end. Good pass defense should be a consideration for maybe checking the Bills' quality slightly. On the other side, I want to see Justin Fields repeat the trick before we actually go back to him aggressively. He's obviously going to be in play. We've seen him succeed, many times in terms of being able to find production with his legs. Always going to come down to how he throws the ball. We do have a high-end receiver to work with on that team, and we've got a very, very interesting running back in Breece Hall who got poached for a touchdown that really cost us in terms of scoring, but he looked pretty terrific and explosive in that first game. So I am interested in Hall. New England at Miami. I think this is an interesting spot. Doesn't really rate well, but when I update projections later on after the show, the evening projections, I want to kind of take a look at it. For one thing, you'll note right here in the middle of the board, and we will get back into discussing the player-by-player rankings. Drake May, just 11th by fantasy points, but that's not nothing. On a slate with 24 quarterbacks available, jumps to 3rd by value, 9th by value on FanDuel as a quarterback. He also suffers from that problem of it's a mediocre team overall, so they don't rate out like crazy in terms of their fantasy point projections. That drags their value ratings down slightly, while those are still playable values. But that's what I want to look if I can find a point here, a point there. We can make those look a little bit better. And I think that might actually pay because Drake May's skill set is not all that dissimilar from Danny Dimes, who just torched this Miami team. And I think Drake May is the more talented of those two guys. I think he's got some nice pieces to work with. So I'm interested in that New England spot, hopefully as a cheapo, sneak it through kind of a play that you can get some other big skill players into. You got some reasonable bring back plays on the other side of that one. I would expect quite a bit more out of Miami. It's a 2.5-point game in which they're favored, 43.5-point total on the board there. So we would be leaning into the underdog team if we head toward New England in that spot. But it's just kind of appealing for where they're priced. 20.5-point implied total for them, 23 on the Miami side. They obviously got to get their act together, but still, Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, there is a lot of talent on that team. They will have some explosive games this year. The greatly diminished San Francisco 49ers in New Orleans taking on the Saints. They're still 3-point favorites on the road, just a 40.5-point total in that one, but obviously took some big knocks in week one. Lost Brock Purdy for a couple of weeks, lost star tight end George Kittle for quite a while. So greatly diminished. It's Mac Jones at the helm. He's going to be at the bottom of the quarterback board, ranked 24th by fantasy points, but does spring all the way up to 7th by DraftKings value because he's only 4,000 on that slate. Mac Jones, not what I would call good, but maybe capable. That New Orleans defense, kind of middle of the road against the pass, I could see some upside, but it's mostly going to come via Christian McCaffrey. I think it's going to be a big McCaffrey day as long as his glass legs don't break underneath him. Jacksonville and Cincy, love this spot. I'm big time on Jacksonville this year. They didn't exactly distinguish themselves in week one in the passing game. Trevor Lawrence had just a light day, just did what he needed to do out there while Travis Etienne went kind of bananas. He was so good in week one that the team traded Tank Bigsby to Philly. Couple of draft picks. Looks like Travis Etienne's job to run with a little bit. There are a couple of depth options behind him, but it's a lot less constricted than it was just going into last week when we had no idea what that was going to look like. I like Lawrence's upside. I like the weapons they've got in that passing game with two primo wide receiver options and a strong tight end in Brenton Strange that people are not yet caught up to. If that game goes off and if Cincy is doing their thing and it just takes to the air to fulfill that 49.5-point game total, I love that spot on both sides. I think you've got tremendous bring back options on both sides of that for stacking. +2s on both sides work. +2 with a bring back on both sides work. I think the running backs are talented enough and involved enough in the passing game that you can include running backs in either of those stacks. Super appealing game in Cincinnati. Team separated by just 3.5 with the hometown Bengals favored, but only just 49.5-point total is interesting. That puts the teams at a 26.5 implied total for Cincy and 23 points for Jayville. Like that spot. Where are we on this board? Denver at Indy, 43-point total there. I do not expect Daniel Jones to succeed against Denver and their pretty solid defense the way that he did in week one. Going to see him tumble down the board, and I think going to him this week would be a mistake. He rates out okay. He's 18-19 on DraftKings, 19-23 on FanDuel, where he got juiced up to 7,200 price-wise. That stack rates out 19-20, 18-23 across sites. He does have weapons in the passing game to work with. I like that passing game. I do not like that quarterback. They also have a very high-volume running back that needs his touches. I think he comes tumbling down against that good Denver defense this week. Denver on the other side of that one, I think you can get into 43-point total in the game. They're 2.5-point favorites on the road, largely on the back of that defense, but they've got an interesting enough offense if they start to click. 22.75 implied total with a few weapons in the passing game. I don't love the running back split, but we'll get into that. Carolina and Arizona. Arizona favored by 7 at home, 44.5-point total. Against that Carolina team, we are going to be interested in the opposing offenses. Somebody in the chat was just mentioning before that they're not entirely wild about getting over the top with Arizona. And I can respect that. Kyler Murray, middle of the board type quarterback, if we're being honest about things. He does rate as QB5 by fantasy points this week in this matchup, though. But you can see on DraftKings, he drops to quarterback 11 by points per dollar value. They're stacked 7-7 on DraftKings, 7-8 on FanDuel. When I say those numbers, by the way, it's going to be points, then value, the way it's laid out here. So 7-7, 7th by points, 7th by value, 7-8, 7th by points, 8th by value. See, I feel like you guys can track that one. Not the most complex code in the world. So I'm into the Arizona spot. The other side of that, not really. Another spot where it's just dragged down by the quarterback play. I really don't like it. I think maybe we get a little sneaky with some Ted McMillan shares. I think Chuba Hubbard remains a playable option. but it's underwhelming. And if they're playing from behind as 7-point dogs, what does that do to Hubbard's overall rush game volume? Maybe he sees a few looks in the passing game, but limited. Monster in KC in the late window. 1-point game. Eagles favored on the road in Kansas City. A little Super Bowl rematch. 47.5-point total there. All pieces on all sides look very interesting. I will say that Patty Mahomes ranks in as QB 8 by points, but 14th and 12th by value. And the stack ranks 14, 16, and 13, 17. Just kind of a middle of the road stack. You've got an underperforming Travis Kelce to work with. You've got Hollywood Brown, who was a massive target monster last week after Xavier Worthy got hurt very early in the game. But if everybody's keying in on Hollywood, that's not going to go well. You do have a couple of deep shot options in this offense. You have a couple of other guys where we'll spread around some of the passing game for sure. You've got very limited running in Pacheco and Kareem Hunt sharing that job. Neither guy was good in the first week. So it's kind of dicey for KC outside of Mahomes and then just the straightforward Mahomes to Kelce connection. He did score a touchdown in week 1, Kels, but I think it was limited to 4 targets if memory serves. You write a lot of target numbers out when you're writing for like 10 straight hours about 24 football teams. But I think that was the number. We'll get to it. Last game up on the docket here, Atlanta at Minnesota. 3.5-point game there. Oh no, that's on the that's the end of the night. That one's not on this board, right? Yeah, that was our last game on the afternoon window. I went 1 too far screenshotting Pinnacle there. So a lot of interesting spots, a lot of playability. Getting back to the Andy's here. What's going on, Andy? Glad you made it live. And he's saying, oh wow, glad I made it live. King of all trades is here. Tismain pointing out Xavier Edwards is scratched from the Marlins, for whom it may concern. Playing that, I think that's the afternoon baseball slate, right? That's not on the main. We'll get the main slate lineups updated for baseball after this show. Everything is up on the website for the 7:10 slate, the main on both sites. But yeah, that game's in the afternoon slate. Not updated yet on Fantasy Lab, so I can't tell you who the new leadoff hitter is yet. Edwards is a good player, but it's going to not be great for the old dynasty team. Things falling apart. Skubal came out of the game last night. That's going to hurt us over the last couple of weeks. Edwards scratched. Got a lot of guys injured coming down the stretch. Holding this thing together with scotch tape right now. Yeah, Tiz, appreciate it. Absolutely. Always shout those things out. Definitely. UE2K says, hello, just got here. What is this show about? I mean, it's Angle. I understand it's DFS. It's talking through every angle on the slate as much as we can. We get pretty deep into the game-by-game, player-by-player breakdown. We talk about slate values. We talk about pricing, how things fit together on the DFS slate. There's not too many different angles that one can take to, really cracking a DFS slate. We're just talking about it. But yeah, we're here from rotoscouts.com is the website. Check that out. Everything at Rotoscouts is under $1 a day. I would say that if we have a theme, it is keeping money in your bankroll, helping you grow your bankroll, and not charging through the nose for fantasy projections that really should be much more affordable than they are across the industry. Everything at Rotoscouts under $1 a day, and that gives you access to anything that hits that website. So right now you're getting full baseball content for every main slate, full content for every single football game out there, main slates and showdown slates, NHL, NBA included after that. We talk a lot about, hand building, smaller lineup, pool building, 20 maxes, single entries, but we're also here to cater toward the 150 maxers. Projections work either direction. But my findings, EWE2K there is a lot of people enter not exactly 150 lineups, even for football. The average fan out there, the average player, not entering 150 lineups. So try and cater a little bit to the larger portion of the community. But yeah, we're talking about rankings here right now. We've got the quarterbacks up on the board for anybody who wasn't here previously. I think it's a good starting point just talking through. We talked about a couple of the top options up there. Jalen Hurts in that Philly KC game looking pretty tremendous with landing 4th on the board by points. That ridiculous Philly offense carries him up to the 2nd ranked overall stack, 3rd, 5th by value because they're an expensive group. Hurts was really interesting in week 1. Needs to remember his wide receivers from time to time. but a ridiculously interesting quarterback with his ability to score the ball on the ground. He ran 2 in week 1. Only connected with A.J. Brown once, but I expect that to change in week 2. Devontae Smith had a little bit better of a game. Both those receivers should be involved in a big way, but there are a lot of mouths to feed and only so many opportunities to go around in Philly. So you have to be somewhat cautious with what you put together, how deep you make that stack. But an excellent, excellent option in what should be a pretty high-octane game. Murray, we talked about, great matchup going up against Carolina. That stack rates out pretty well. Top 10 stack across the board on both sites. Love the opportunity for the Cowboys to just utterly destroy the Giants. As mentioned, Dak rates out number 6 by points on both sites, 4th and 3rd by value across sites, while that stack lands 4th by points and top 10 value ratings landing 3rd by value in that stack on the FanDuel slate. That's including, again, that's using Dak and his top 3 skill players to arrive at those numbers. So primo spot for the Cowboys. Love Trevor Lawrence. I am for some reason, stuck on endorsing Trevor Lawrence this year. I don't really know how I arrived at it, but here I am. He's on both my fantasy teams in season long. I was advocating for him last week, and I'm coming right back to the table to advocate for him in what should turn into a shootout here. Since he's going to take to the air, they're going to be more aggressive than they were in that very limited game last week. I think we see this one pay off. Lawrence is going to have to do his thing out there and connect with those big receivers that he's got. But he's got excellent options among his pass catchers. He's got a capable, let's say, running back who proved himself to a degree last week. Really interested in all things Jags, at least till further notice. If they let us down and then let us down again for the next 2 weeks after this one, maybe we'll reconsider our position. I do not like where Caleb Williams is rated on this board. 9th by fantasy points, 5th by value among quarterbacks. Feels a little bit rough for a wildly unreliable player. I left it alone. I didn't adjust his projection down or anything like that. And to the point that I was making before, there's not a ton of daylight between his 18-something point projections and these 18s, these high 17s, these slightly higher 18s and 19s. So those numbers can fluctuate, and you can get them easily with a minor adjustment to 12th rank that doesn't look nearly as good as those single-digit numbers do. But I left it alone. As mediocre as he was throughout last year, he had multiple games. I think, 5 games of 300 yards or more? Clicking on Cleveland, then Cincinnati doesn't help us access this at all faster. Caleb last season had one, two, three, four. It was 4 games of more than 300 yards. Handful of touchdowns here and there. Hit his stride through the second half of the season. I'd say from week 11 on. Was a more reliable passer in a lot of those spots. Had a couple weak ones over that stretch as well. Only 122 yards on 16 of 28 passing with no touchdown and an interception against Seattle in week 17. But if we're riding with some of the upside, he's got plenty of skill in that offense. So while I'm skeptical, I don't love putting it out there into the world. I do think it's reasonable given the talent in the stack and given what the demands of that game environment should be if they're going to be competitive at all. It's going to be on him to succeed rather than on me to rank him. Bo Nix at 10th overall slips to 17th by DraftKings value. 6,100 seems like a big price tag when you can have a lot of these guys for cheaper. Nix is capable. That is a gettable Indy defense. They did limit passing to just 4.3 yards per pass attempt last time out, though. That ranks 6th. Came away with a few sacks, couple picks. But that was against a fairly weak opponent that doesn't necessarily measure up, or at least did not last week. So I think it's a playable spot for Nix, kind of in the middle where he lands. Talked about Drake May already. Love the value there. I think there's upside against that low-end Miami defense pretty much for anybody that's going to be playing them all season long. We saw that in week 1. I think we do see it again here in week 2. So I'm interested in that spot as a sneaky value. I do not love Justin Fields. I prefer getting to his skill players individually. But we can always throw some darts at Fields just given that tremendous rushing upside that he possesses at the position. The number of days where he drags skill players along with him necessarily, though, is going to be a lower number than the number of days on which he succeeds as an individual, at times might be better to consider him in a naked quarterback kind of a role. Jared Goff leading the way for that tremendous attack in Detroit. He's actually probably the lowest ranked positional guy out of everybody, from their skill players through the quarterback. You can see how the stack rate's better than he rates. He's QB 13 across the board. The stack is stacked 6 by points on DraftKings, 5 by points on FanDuel. Obviously an expensive spot, so they don't rate quite as well for value, but that's a tremendous team that we can go to time after time. Tua needs to get there with his weapons. It's inexcusable for them to be as bad as they were in week 1, given the several very, very talented skill players with which he plays. They rate out okay as a stack, 9-10 on DraftKings, 9-7 on FanDuel, but more mix and matchy. Then we get into an ugly spot with Cam Ward. I don't necessarily love him landing ahead of, say, Stafford, Darnold, most of those other guys. I am not really a big believer in that spot right now. 4,900, 6,700, he is uniquely cheap. He threw for 112 yards while completing 43% of his pass attempts. Threw the ball just 28 times, 4 yards per pass attempt in week 1. Has all the tools and has plenty of skill players to work with. That's the reason I'm willing to leave him where he rates out. But I don't love where he lands relative to some of these other options. I do like Stafford, again, carried by some very talented receivers in that group. Should hit the board several times through the year. He's fairly priced. Only lands in the middle because his ability to stand tall doesn't run the ball, for example. So only accrues fantasy points in the passing game. But reasonable expectations of success, just working with a target monster like Puka Nacua, working with the continued upside of Devontae Adams. So I do like that offense, and I think we will get to some Rams successfully this year. They rate out much better as a stack than he does as a quarterback. They rank as stack 5 by points on DraftKings and stack 6 on FanDuel, mid-board type value ratings. Sammy Darnold, not too good in his debut in Seattle after a strong season in Minnesota last year, filling in for the injured McCarthy. Now he's just kind of mediocre here, but he does have weapons in this offense. Jackson Smith and Jigba, for one thing. A couple of running backs in something of a positional battle doesn't exactly help up the board. There should be days of capability out of Darnold. I don't love him in this spot, but the Steelers did just give up 9.6 yards per pass attempt in a very limited performance against Justin Fields. I would expect more from them going forward. Again, Danny Dimes is not going to repeat that performance against Denver. Your money back for this free show if he does. Russell Wilson, no. Even if Dallas is bad, so is Russell Wilson. So are those Giants. Maybe a skinny stack here and there of Wilson to neighbors, and that's about it. That's really all you want from the Giants. Aaron Rodgers, I have just as little faith in him repeating his task as I do in Daniel Jones. I probably have the most faith in Justin Fields finding a little bit of upside. Rodgers is going to need to go out and do it again before I'm much of a believer here. Going up against a defense that did allow 7.6 yards per pass attempt should help him. The Seahawks were significantly better up front against the run, allowing just 3.3 yards per rush attempt last week. They gained a lot of pressure, came away with 1 sack, pair of interceptions. Joe Flacco feels a little bit thin against the Ravens, especially with the limited passing game that they've got out there. Did throw the ball a bunch in week 1, though. 45 pass attempts. He completed 31 of them, threw for 290 yards. A touchdown, 2 interceptions, kind of betrays the lack of quality. 6.40 yards per pass attempt. There's interesting receivers, a couple of them anyway. Fannon's an interesting tight end. Tillman's interesting at wide out, but I think they're better in other lineups as standalone players than getting over the moon about Flacco shares. Spencer Rattler, hard no. Bryce Young, hard no. Mac Jones does find a little bit of a value rating. That's only because he cost $4,000 though. Caps in the chat saying Mac going to have some fantasy ownership this Sunday by the Grinders. We play everyone. Mac Jones, the lowest projected QB. Wow, I find that interesting, says EWE2K. Again, he does pick up a little bit by value. He's only offset by a couple of points. I would ask it this way. When was the last time Mac Jones was overly relevant? Filled in for 10 games for the Jags last year, threw 8 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, if I remember correctly. Has never been as good as he was in his rookie season. And clicking on New England is not going to get us to him. Mac last year, 10 games, completed 65% of his 262 pass attempts for 1,672 yards with Jacksonville, 8 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Year before, played 11 games his final season in New England, 2,100 yards, 10 TDs, 12 interceptions. 14 games, under 3,000 yards, 14 TDs, 11 interceptions. Again, his best season by far was his rookie year. 7.3 yards per pass attempt. He completed 67% of his passes, threw for 3,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. That was 4 years ago now. So some skill players there to work with, but the collision of factors between him not being that good, him being the backup, them not being fully healthy, losing some of their critical skill players, the volume that's probably going to go through Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey catches 3 passes and runs them all into the end zone. It's going to bring Mac Jones up the board a little bit. But yeah, I pretty much stand by that projection. Could you argue for him being above Rattler, Young, maybe Flacco? Sure. No question. There's not exactly a ton of daylight between those guys. Andy saying Jones could be the sneaky stack, run it back. Not sure who you're referring to with that one. Yeah, Dallas Goedert out as legalized mentions. So hopefully does push a little bit more passing volume through AJ than the one target. I think he gained 8 yards on that one. So yeah, a little rough. Oh yeah, EW, if you're interested in smaller field single entry, as Greg Biancone says, I think this should be a good spot for you. Got to be patient with me, obviously, though. I kind of, as you probably noticed already, tend to meander around, chew up more words than I need to. But hopefully you can pull some good info from it. Glad you found us. So that's it up and down for the quarterbacks, the general shape of the slate, the stacks. Put the skill players back on the board. Defenses are here as well, by the way. Just to do that real quick, actually. A couple of standout defenses. Baltimore against that low-end Cleveland team, obviously standing pretty tall, but obviously very expensive as well. You can see that somewhat reflected in their value ratings. The Steelers do rate out well against a questionable Seattle offense, especially with that running back share where neither guy has been overly successful right now, and the carries are kind of up in the air. Buffalo against the Jets, don't mind that spot. We do need to limit Justin Fields, and obviously Hall is problematic. Wilson is problematic. But the Bills should handle their business fairly well there. Definitely interested in Denver, but they're highly priced 14th and 15th by value. The Eagles are kind of interesting. They sneak through at a somewhat low value mark, but there is a fair opportunity that KC does do a little bit of scoring there. Might knock them down the board a little. Lions against the Bears. If you get the bad Caleb day, the Lions should be in play. They should get to him a little bit up front as well. I think the Cards on the FanDuel slate as the 4th ranked value defense against Carolina, pretty interesting. That is a low-end opponent. So they come in 7th on the board by points. They fall to 15 on the DraftKings slate because they're 34. 3,900 on FanDuel is a little bit generous. I don't love where San Francisco lands, especially with that high value mark. Good defense against a nothing team. Spencer Rattler doesn't exactly inject fear into my heart. But Kamara's still good. Chris Olave, if he's able to stay on the field, is still good. Rashid Shaheed is still good. The delivery of the ball to those players is in question. But I don't love paying up for San Francisco's D here. I think the Cowboys against the Giants are really interesting. They rank 10-13 on DraftKings for a fair 3,000. 10-3 on FanDuel because they're only 34 over there. That really, really works. Interesting to pair them maybe with a cheap Turpin in the kick return role as well. KC, just a mixer against Philly, but they rate out well for value. New Orleans against that diminished San Francisco team is kind of interesting. A few spots further down the board. 13th by points, nothing special there, but they rate 3rd and 1st by value. They cost just 2,500, 3,000 across sites. Free defense against the team that's got the backup quarterback in. We just went through their potential this week. One of their top receivers is banged up. Their top tight end is out. Can New Orleans stop Mac Jones and Christian McCaffrey? I'm willing to say they at least have a shot. Down the board from there, just kind of mix and matchy type defenses at a variety of prices. No real priorities. I think the priority plays stop at that New Orleans one. A lot of value to work with, though, on this defensive board. Kind of interesting. That's the best way to do this. That, and then that. Does that work? That does not work. All right. Yes, there we go. So we're alphabetized by team and by games here, just to get a look at the full breakdown. Andy likes San Francisco, New Orleans. Stack it with the run back. All right. That's one way to go. I like McCaffrey from San Francisco. Duh. Super obvious statement there. I think there's usable parts. Not the biggest fan of Pearsall, but he had a good week 1. Just low faith in that Mac Jones spot, really. I'd be more interested in picking up some of the ground game. I'm honestly, not that I have any love for Spencer Rattler at all and don't necessarily think he's any better than Mac Jones, but I'm somewhat interested in those pass catchers in New Orleans. I do think that Chris Olave remains very good. It's just major question mark as far as his ability to stay out there, and are they going to get him the ball? So again, we're just alphabetical here as we look at the full team breakdowns. So we're just going to go through some of these, but we do have a game by game setup. So starting with this Bills and Jets game, Allen, obviously super interesting. James Cook just gained 3.4 yards per rush attempt. Direct your attention over here to the rushing area. Carried the ball 13 times, did score. So he pads stats when he gets into the end zone. Typically a middle of the board type running back talent, though. Medium as far as volume goes. He saw 18 potential touches last week and delivered 18 actual touches, 13 on the ground, picked up 5 targets in the passing game, which keeps him on the board somewhat, especially in PPR format. If you can pick up a few bonus points via just a few catches, cheap points, does thrust him upward a little bit. He rates his running back 13, 12 across sites by points, less than that by value. Played 56% of the snaps. The lead running back, but he was cut into slightly by Ty Johnson, Ray Davis. Neither one of those guys is any real threat. Both guys have a little bit of involvement in the passing game. Johnson broke a decent gain. He put up, carried the ball twice and gained 24 yards. 9 before contact, 3 after contact per attempt. But again, super limited volume. Neither of those guys, outside of poaching a touchdown that may otherwise have gone to James Cook, like what we saw with Braylon Allen last week on the Jets, they're not really on the board unless something happens above them on the depth chart. You do have several capable receivers here, though. Keon Coleman had the bigger week in week 1. Played 88% of the snaps, drew a monster 11 targets, put up 112 yards, 10.2 yards per target on a 12-yard ADOT, 33% of the air yard share, scored a touchdown. Excellent debut as the number 1 here, or debut for this season. Khalil Shakir was the guy that I was kind of on for that showdown slate as the number 2. I tend to go that route a little bit because you pick off a lower ownership and don't really lose much in the captain role. Didn't really work out for us. He was targeted 9 times. Came away with 6 catches, but only 7.1 yards per target. It was a 9.4 yard ADOT that amounted to just 21.25% share of the air yards. There are better days ahead for Khalil Shakir. He's a talented player who can get down the field effectively. definitely a target in this offense for Allen. But if they're going to lean a little bit Keon Coleman, I'm happy to go in that direction with them. I think both players are in play. +2 builds for Josh Allen are definitely playable, and you can get both of those guys into that mix. Given Cook's targeting in the offense, I think you can go with either one of the lead receivers and Cook in a stack to pivot a little bit ownership-wise. Last season, Shakir had 76 catches on 100 targets exactly, 8.2 yards per target, scored 4 touchdowns, just dropped 1 ball through the season. Capable receiver with sticky hands. Tends to be interesting with a high volume, very talented quarterback in play. We tumbled down the depth chart a little bit with Joshua Palmer here. He did have a solid 12.8 yard ADOT and picked up 9 targets in week 1. Caught just 5 of them for 61 yards, limited actual production. But the shape of those targets and the volume was actually kind of compelling for a receiver who slots in just 4,400, 5,100. As a mixer, especially in like +2 builds where you don't go both Coleman and Shakir, Palmer fits in and he differentiates things while seeing a little bit of potential. Played 62% of the snaps in week 1. Dalton Kincaid was a little bit limited, 51% of the snaps week 1. He drew 4 targets, did put up 12 yards per target, but not exactly a tremendous amount of volume. He did outdraw Dawson Knox, but Knox will be involved here and there. Kincaid ran 28 routes over 41 snaps, was targeted on just 14% of those. Did find his way into the end zone. So obviously pad scoring a little bit with his touchdown potential. He only had 2 last year in 13 games. Caught 44 passes for 448 yards. I think we can increase that touchdown total expectation since we're already halfway there. But I don't think we go nuts with it. Not with a little bit of healthy competition in the tight end room. But at worst, 3 very viable wide receivers to work with Josh Allen here in any kind of mix at a variety of prices and a capable running back. I actually think I prefer Cook involved in Buffalo stacks rather than as a standalone running back. A lot of times we'll say, all right, you want to split out the running back. You get him in your standalone shares from this team. You can include some of them in stacks when they have more involvement in the passing game. So I think Cook makes that case a little bit. Last season, he gained 4.9 yards per rush attempt, put up 1,009 yards, and scored 16 touchdowns on the ground. So you don't want to totally discount his individual contributions. But he was also targeted 38 times in the offense, 6.8 yards per target, drew 54 targets the year before over 17 games. So a capable player any way you slice it. But again, 13, 21, 12, 20 across sites as far as those rankings go. Probably better as a fit just as a part of the stack. If he was at a better value rating, we'd be more inclined to go in his direction as a standalone. Down depth chart, we tend not to need these lightly projected options. Knox on the board for potentially a couple of routes, maybe a target or 2. And then Elijah Moore drew just 1 target in week 1 and pretty limited. Down the board with Justin Fields. Again, tremendous opportunity. Or tremendous week 1, rather. Just threw the ball 22 times. Completed 16 of those passes. That's 73%. Threw for 218 yards. Just 1 touchdown on the board, but a really interesting 9.9 yards per pass attempt. Got out there and gained 4 yards per rush attempt on his 12 carries. That's where the significant contributions came from. Ran the ball in twice. Was one of the leading scorers at the quarterback position in week 1. Didn't really get a ton of participation from anyone in the passing game not named Garrett Wilson. Wilson caught 7 of 9 targets, and when you're only completing 16 passes, that doesn't leave a ton of volume for anybody else. He put up 10.6 yards per target. He scored a touchdown. He dominated the air yard share at 55.4%. 9.6 yard ADOT, not exactly huge, but significant enough. That is a very, very talented receiver who ranks 1535 on DraftKings, 1833 on FanDuel. Just needs the competence to continue from Justin Fields, just delivering him the football and targeting him 9 to 12 times a week. And he should see that kind of volume. They do not have much else in this passing game. Breece Hall is a really appealing running back. He gained 5.6 yards per rush attempt over 19 carries and a solid bounce back after he came into the season with a bunch of, to me, unfair doubt. Played 58% of the snaps in week 1, put up 107 yards, 2.9 before contact, 2.7 after contact per attempt. Failed to score. As mentioned, we got this stupid Braylon Allen touchdown instead. A lot of backup touchdowns, a lot of poached touchdowns, a lot of Joe Random Guy touchdowns. Frustrating week 1. Allen caught 4 passes, didn't score in the passing game. Fairly insignificant contributions, did gain 38 yards, 9.5 per target. He's capable. He had a negative 3.3 yard ADOT because everything comes out of the backfield when he's catching the ball. But considering that now 13 of our targets, or 13 of our 22 total opportunities went to those 2 players. 9 of our 16 catches went to those 2 guys. Gets very, very thin as we go down this board. Allen, just a dart throw and another poached touchdown, and I don't think we're necessarily even correctly priced for that at 5,200 on both sides. RB 34.40, RB 34.38 across. Not really all that compelling unless something happens to Breece Hall. He'll be involved. He will see some goal line opportunities. Not involved in the passing game in week 1, but a limited option as far as our DFS purposes go outside of just trying to pick off that cheap touchdown. Mason Taylor, sure, just 1 target in week 1. Was out there running routes. Tall the God is here. What's going on, Tall? Taylor is questionable, by the way. Dealing with an ankle injury, practiced in full on Friday. But again, just 1 target. He ran 24 routes, played 54 snaps. That's 88% snap share and just not involved. You see any more involvement in his future? Maybe a target here and there, but pretty limited. Ruckert on the other side of the tight end position played 45% of the snaps. He was targeted twice. Caught them both for 16 yards. Not exactly a major contribution, but if you're splitting out targets in an already limited targeted position in this offense, you get really ugly really fast with those options. Allen Lazard was a healthy scratch in week 1. He's on the board right now. We'll see whether he plays. I guess he would be in the mix for a potential touchdown pass. Lazard did score, I want to say, 5 touchdowns last year. Depending on what depth chart you're looking at, by the way. Tyler Johnson, Arian Smith, right next to him or above him. I've got them all essentially pegged for the same game. If he's active, Lazard scored, I was off by 6 touchdowns last year. Gained 530 yards on 37 catches over 60 targets. Played in 12 games. Shockingly, just 28. I would have said like 32, 33. It's been around for a minute. But we are, I think, coming back down the other side of the mountain with Lazard. The thing about him is he remains a large target, just physically big. He's 6'5", 227 at the wide receiver spot. So once we get down toward the red zone, they will call his number from time to time, and that's where those touchdowns can come from. So not dead if he's in the game, dead if he's not in the game. Johnson, pair of targets in week 1. Arian Smith went untargeted. This is where we get a little into the weeds, but I think it's kind of important to try and suss this out a little. Johnson picked up his 2 targets on just 14 routes. Was out there for 32 snaps with the offense. Arian Smith, a 4th-round rookie, got out there for just 3 routes, played 6 total snaps, and went untargeted. So depending on how the depth chart looks, you could be in a situation where Johnson is your true 3, Lazard's not even playing, and Smith is your lightly involved 4. But if Lazard is active, I would probably expect him to slightly be like this ahead of those 2. Just a matter of who's on the field and what the pecking order looks like, but not a good option in the bunch. Everybody else, low-end depth You know what? I'm going to do this. So much smarter. Take the other stuff off the board, give you guys a little bit of ability to zoom there. Hopefully that looks a little better. Getting into Carolina, Arizona. Again, Arizona rates out pretty well, and everybody all season long, I think we're going to just be chasing matchups against this Carolina team until they prove us wrong. Arizona rates 7 by points on both sides, 7th and 8th by value across the industry. You get a primo tight end option in Trey McBride, not to be confused with Terry McBride, whoever that might be. McBride ranks first on the board on both sites in points, 4th by value at the tight end spot for a healthy $6,000 salary on DraftKings, 1-1 on FanDuel at $7,000 at the position. Potentially dominant tight end spot, 9 targets in the first week. Didn't score, but drew 21.08% of the team's air yards given the volume on just a 3.9 yard average depth of target. Major scoring potential at the position. The ability to rack up some yardage. The ability to have a just high volume game that pushes production. He does have competition for targets. It's a decent receiver room that benefits the stack as a whole, but at times it can cut into McBride's production. Most notably last year, he caught 111 passes, gained 1,146 yards in 16 games, 7.8 yards per target over 147 targets. That's how involved in the offense he is. He only scored 2 touchdowns. Famously had a touchdown drought throughout last season. Year before, as a 23-year-old in his second season, played the full 17, gained 825 yards, put the ball in the end zone just 3 times. So in his 3 years in the league, and year 1 was kind of a wash. He only caught 29 balls that year in his 16 games. But he's only got 6 touchdowns across those 3 seasons. So we definitely need to get him into the end zone a little bit more frequently this year to really make value. He's no secret to anybody. He played 97% of the snaps and, again, drew a monster target share for the position. Excellent, excellent option on any site, any format. Going to be popular at the position, though. James Conner, running back, succeed pretty aggressively against this bad Carolina defense. 6.3 yards per rush attempt allowed last week, ranked 29th. Conner, middle of the board type running back. The touches were a little bit light last week, just 12 carries and 4 targets in the passing game. He came away with all 4 of them. Scored a touchdown in the passing game, but gained just 5 total yards, 1.3 yards per target. Was similarly kind of limited on the ground, lacked explosiveness. Carried the ball 12 times, but gained just 3.3 yards per rush attempt. Against this defense, it should be a healthy get-right spot for Conner. But I do think that's something to watch, at least a little bit going forward. He's getting a little competition from Trey Benson downboard. Benson gained 8.6 yards per rush attempt, quite a bit higher, more than double. Carried the ball just 8 times, but had a solid day with 69 yards on the board, 5.1 yards before contact, 3.5 yards after contact per rush attempt. Still the second banana in the offense, but 33% of the snaps, if that climbs slightly and cuts into Conner's 65%, cuts into a little bit of the carry opportunity, especially if it comes around the end zone, that could be problematic for your Conner shares. As is, though, he's a top 10 running back by points and value on DraftKings. Slips to 14 by value on the FanDuel slate, but still very much in play. And given some expected volume in the passing game all season long, definitely a running back that you can include in Murray plus 2 type builds. If I'm going that route, though, my top priorities are McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin did not have a great game in week 1. Gained 71 yards and put up 11.8 yards per target, which is very appealing. Was targeted 6 times and caught 5 of them, did score, had a 12.7 yard ADOT, 45.78% of the air yards, but just not a completely robust day. I think we expect a little bit more from a kid who's allegedly a superstar caliber talent. He had an underwhelming rookie season as well last year, at least compared to what he came into the league, expectations wise. But getting him on the board for a score in week 1 is definitely interesting. Checks into this week as wide receiver 12 across sites by points, 17th by value on DraftKings, but that easily puts you on the board, and 12th by value on the FanDuel slate. This defense allowed 5.7 yards per pass attempt last week, but gained just a 3% pressure rate. Did not come away with a sack, found an interception along the way, but bottom ranked pressure rate last week, and not much about that should change. Kyler Murray has enough escapability when he needs it, should have all day to throw the ball. Murray threw 2 touchdown passes in week 1, completed 21 of 29. Completely adequate quarterback play while not being necessarily standout. Also gained 5.4 yards per rush attempt over 7 carries, 38 yards on the ground. On a day where he runs one in addition to his ability to throw multiple touchdowns, definitely pads scoring quite a bit and becomes more interesting. That does vault him up the board somewhat for the potential. Talked about Trey Benson, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Zay Jones. Mixers at the wide receiver spot. Not a one of them rates out all that special. In targeting, Wilson did lead the day with 4 in the first game. He came away with just one of them, gained 5 yards. That was on a 15.5-yard average depth of target, though. So we're taking some shots to Michael Wilson. He was on the field the most, 67% of the snap share. So I think real believability in him as the number 2. Played 44 snaps, only ran 26 routes. Marvin ran 32. He was targeted in 14.8% of those routes. And again, just didn't really come away with the ball. But we get a little bit more thin on actually delivering on limited opportunities when we're talking about solid depth of target. So you take a little of the good with a little bad on these deep ball opportunities. But that does keep Wilson on the board, and more on the board, I think, than Dortch and Zay Jones, both of whom were relegated to just 1 target apiece. A negative 2-yard A-dot for Dortch and a 2-yard A-dot for Zay Jones. Neither guy overly appealing, despite seeing a fair handful of snaps, running a few routes out there. They're just not heavily involved. So I think we're limiting to this top group up here in terms of the skill players. Benson is kind of a take it or leave it backup. He did, again, have an explosive, nice enough day in week 1, but he's going to live and die with how many touches he gets behind Connor. And if they're feeding a bunch of mouths in the passing game in a week where they might get aggressive, I don't love it. Bryce Young is cheap, but bad. Doesn't rate out for value or fantasy points across either site. His Carolina stack doesn't rate out all that well either. I do think that Ted McMillan could be interesting. You can see very strong value ratings. He was targeted 9 times in this offense in week 1. Aggressive targeting for the rookie. Came away with 5 catches, 68 yards, 11.6 yard average depth of target, and garnered 40% of the air yards. That makes him very interesting. They were looking to get him the ball and get him looks down the stretch of that game, too, if you were watching. Just makes him somewhat interesting here. And easily their most interesting receiver. Kid's another big target. 6'5", 212, drafted 8th overall in the first round out of Arizona this year. So that is a very real WR1 body with a lot of potential. It's just the fact that he has Bryce Young throwing him the ball. Young completed 18 of 35 in week 1, threw for 154 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions, 4.4 yards per pass attempt is not impressive. 7.7 intended air yards per attempt is all right, but just not capable of delivering on anything that they're trying to do here. Did gain 8 yards per rush attempt for 40 total yards on 5 carries, but that's not going to win the day. It's not going to win the game. It's not going to win your DFS slate. He's just cheap. Last season, 14 games, completed 60.9% of the pass attempts, 2,400 yards, 15 TDs, and 9 interceptions. The year before, 2,800 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions on just under 60% completions. Threw for 5.5 yards per attempt that year, 6.3 last year. It's a limited quarterback. Did he have a game over 300 yards last year? He did not. Peaked at 298 yards last year in a shootout against Tampa Bay in week 13. Completed 26 of 46 that day, threw 1 touchdown. Didn't throw a pick, but that's not usually his game. A couple of mid 200-yard days. This is a bad QB. It's a shame because I do think that, again, McMillan is an interesting option and talented. Very affordable. I think he works quite well as a value wide receiver, just in other stacks or in other lineups where you're not stacking around Bryce Young. He also works really, really well as a bring back play in stacks of Arizona players. If you go Murray, McBride, Harrison, and then pad Tet McMillan into the second wide receiver position to take advantage of the full game here, I think that's a reasonable way to build a lineup. You could also use Chuba Hubbard in that role as a bring back play. Relatively strong volume in week one, carried the ball 16 times, drew another 5 opportunities in the passing game. He caught 3 of them, but 21 potential touches, as I said on the showdown slate the other day. A lot of the time, I'm just looking for 20 potential touches out of a running back, depending on what the price point looks like. So Hubbard is on that list. The thing about it is, most of the time, just a mediocre running back. 3.6 yards per rush attempt last week, 1.8 before, 1.8 yards after. Gained 6.4 yards per target on limited targeting just out of the backfield, but did score in the passing game. Has that ability. So these are your 2 interesting skill players, and then we get awfully thin and awfully fast around Xavier Legette, Jatavian Sanders, Rico Dowdle, who was surprisingly uninvolved last week. It's just a thin, bad team. They're going up against a defense that allowed 4.9 yards per rush attempt, but only 4.5 yards per pass attempt last week. So maybe it's an opportunity for Chuba Hubbard to have a decent day, but I don't think he does all that much special, and he doesn't exactly rate out well positionally. So I think he just has like this kind of a day. And if they continue to limit the passing opportunities, that's going to impact Tet McMillan. That's going to impact your lower end options like Legette, Jatavian Sanders. Legette does hit 29th by points per dollar, but that's against a 42nd ranking by points. Less appealing on FanDuel at a higher average price. Did play 78% of the snaps, drew 7 targets last week, caught only 3 of them. I don't know what the catchable ball rate was on those targets, but I imagine it wasn't very good because Bryce Young's numbers weren't very good in the accuracy categories. There's a little depth of target there, 8.7 yards, garnered 23.74% of the overall air yards. You had another 15% going in Sanders' direction. He operated on a 13.7 yard ADOT that would make him an appealing tight end as far as the depth of target, where he's coming down with the ball and what the scoring potential looks like off of that. But if you have a guy who fails to deliver him the ball when he gets to that position on the field, it's not really worth much. Dowdle, again, coming off of a strong season last year, is back up in Dallas, who got a fair amount of the opportunities. Really wasn't overly involved behind Hubbard in week one. Last season, Dowdle carried the ball 235 times in 16 games. Went over 1,000 yards, 1,079 yards, 4.6 yards per rush attempt. Scored twice on the ground, added 3 touchdowns in the passing game. It's a capable guy. As interesting, as talented probably as Chuba Hubbard at the top of the board, but seems to be in a position where they're kind of viewing him as a straight backup. 34% of the snaps last week. Gained 4 yards per attempt, but only carried the ball 3 times. 2.3 before, 1.7 after contact. Was targeted 3 times in the offense, but again, you're getting limited targeting out of the backfield on just dumps from a bad QB. Really, really limited until further notice on Rico Dowdle. We could see him get more involved immediately in week 2, and then we know there's maybe a little something there. But a disappointing as a sleeper option in week 1. 5,000 for Hunter Renfrow, puts him outside the top 50 on both sites. He did draw 6 targets in week 1. Came away with 25.68% of the air yards. But again, he was getting down the field a little bit for an inaccurate quarterback who he was only able to connect with twice. Gained 11 yards. What do I care about 6 targets if you can't throw them to the receiver? Just mix and match options the rest of the way down on a bad team with Carolina. I continue to think that Carolina is best utilized around those 2 players, Tet McMillan and Chuba Hubbard, primarily as either bring back options in a stack of these guys or just in any given lineup, but not around Bryce Young and not around Carolina stacks. Bad team, limited. How we doing? Hour and change in. Cap likes Bryce Young turning it up tomorrow against Arizona. All right. We'll see. Look, I'm not rooting against the kid. Just don't think he's been good. Didn't show us much yet. I'll be saying the same things in a little bit about Cam Ward. Don't think he looked very ready yet in week 1. In the meantime, though, speaking of Caleb Williams, 21 of 35 in week 1, did go over 200 yards, threw 1 touchdown, didn't throw an interception. 6 yards per pass attempt is not terrible. 7.5 intended air yards per attempt. Again, I'm not in love with where he rates out, but I'm willing to let him have it because he went over 300 yards 4 times last year. He was a little bit better than maybe what the reputation became last year. Not at all reliable, but did go out and win a couple DFS slates, and you can't take that away. He gained 9.7 yards per rush attempt across 6 attempts in week 1 for 58 yards. That makes him a little bit interesting there as well. Ran 1 into the end zone. If he's running the ball a little bit this year, that pads scoring for sure for a quarterback who may be a little bit limited as a passer. So we definitely need that part of his game to continue to evolve a little bit. But he's got strong weapons in this passing game. I like DJ Moore. 13th and 15th by points, slips into the top 10 by value on the DraftKings slate. Not so much on FanDuel, but still a very playable mark. He picked up 5 targets on an 18.4 yard average depth of target, 35% of the air yards. Could have had a bigger day if he had a couple more accurate passes. Gained 68 yards on his 3 catches, though, 13.6 yards per target. Remains a very interesting receiver. The touchdown in the passing game went to second-year man Roma Dunze, who I absolutely adore in this situation. If I'm going to that team at 4,800, at 5,800, when he comes in as the 28th by points, but the 8th by value, that makes Rome really interesting. And you can see where the Bears are picking up their quality. By the way, have I used the baseball name for the teams from any of these cities yet? I'm going to. I must have written, the Reds instead of the Bengals and so on and so forth a dozen times during that article right up last night and last week. Hopefully so far so good though. But back to the point, the Bears really gained ground by value, especially on that DraftKings slate via those 3. 5th at quarterback, and then the 9th and 8th ranked value receivers. That's an appealing cheap stack. That's a $5,267 average spend, $15,800 for the 3 players. If they connect at all, you're off and running. And as maybe disappointing as he was last year, let's remember Roma Dunze was a top 10 pick. That is a guy they need to succeed. They're going to feed him the ball, and he's a talented kid. He was the 9th overall pick last year, 6'3", 215 out of Washington. He was only all right. He was targeted 101 times, so he was involved in the offense as a rookie, played all 17 last year. Only came away with 54 of those, 734 yards, 3 touchdowns. You can blame some of that on the erratic nature of the quarterback. You can blame some of it on his route running as a rookie. But a kid who's definitely capable of breaking big ones. He had 200-plus yard games last year. 8 plays of more than 20 yards, 2 of more than 40 yards, and was heavily involved in week 1. It's nice to see him come away with a team-leading 9 targets. Caught 6 of those for 37 yards, just 4.1 per target on a middling 6.6-yard average depth of target, but got into the end zone. Critical importance to actually put one into the end zone. Highly, highly involved, though, 94% of the snaps. He ran 40 routes over 59 snaps, targeted 22.5% of those routes run. It's a strong receiver option on both sides, but I love the way they play for value on the DraftKings slate. I'm getting more invested in the Bears as I talk about it. We got to get through this team quick. Colston Loveland, really disappointing in week 1. It came in with all the buzz in the world. Highly drafted prospect. Supposed to revolutionize the tight end position. Looks to me like he's number 2 on the depth chart behind Cole Kmet. Kmet outsnapped him. 90% snap share to a 57% snap share. Kid was out there for 35 snaps in his debut. He ran 19 routes. He was targeted twice. He caught them both. That's a 10.5% target share on those routes. Limited routes, limited opportunities on those routes. Does not equal fantasy success. The kid's talented. They dunked a 10th overall pick into him. 6'6", 240. He's got the body of an NFL tight end, the draft pedigree of an NFL tight end, but limited for opportunity in that first game. Kmet drew double the targets. He only caught one of them, but it was for a 31-yard gain. It was actually a very nice play. 13-yard average depth of target for Kmet. He was getting out there and getting down the field. The kid was only on a 2.5-yard ADOT. Just utilized differently in that first week. Could that swing very dramatically in Colston Loveland's favor this week or in upcoming weeks? Absolutely. I would say we fully expect it to. But right now, we don't know. It does check the enthusiasm for Loveland, and it puts Cole Kmet on the board more than he may otherwise have been. I was interested in him last week as a depth option from this team, and I'm interested again, even though people kind of know about it, because that's kind of been confirmed. He's going to be involved, at least in the early part of the season. DeAndre Swift, I skipped over at running back. He's entirely mediocre. 3.1 yards per rush attempt in week 1. Did carry the ball 17 times, though. So if we're just looking at volume, 17 carries and 5 targets in the offense does put him over our magic number of 20 potential touches. But he doesn't really do anything to wow you. 1.2 yards before contact, 1.9 after. Came away with 3 catches for 12 yards. Negative 0.6 ADOT, that's nobody's fault operating out of the backfield, but did not make anything happen once the ball was in his hands. Olamide Zacchaeus got on the field. He was a little bit buzzy as like a sleeper, maybe heavily involved, at least in the early stages with this team, and kind of delivered on that. Played just 45% of the snaps, but was targeted 7 times in the offense. He's got game-breaking skills. We've seen it in the past. You put the ball in his hands. He is a light version of like a Deebo Samuel type where he can just make things happen after the catch. Ran 26 routes, was targeted on 26.9% of those. That was 26 routes run on 28 snaps with the offense. So essentially, if OZ was out on the field, he was running a route. And a high percentage of the time, they were looking in his direction. Kind of a tell for the offense, but he was productive. Caught 4 of 7 balls for 6 yards per target, 42 yards total. Operated on an 8.1 yard ADOT, kind of in the middle. If he's going to stay that heavily involved, he's interesting. Just a dart throw type receiver. He's never going to really project overly heavy unless the role changes somewhat. Never going to rocket to the top of the rankings board. But he's more playable than these ratings, these projections might look like, given the involvement and given just the raw skill set. If you're looking for like a mixer to get away from like too many more roam combos or like, one of those and then like the tight end, OZ is very much on the board for that. The disappointing guy, Luther Burden, our hot shot rookie that we were all over in that first game. Drew 1 target, played 27% of the snaps. I expect more going forward, but I can't guarantee you that's going to happen starting this week. He's another kid. They sunk a second-round pick into him, 39 overall. High pedigree, interesting receiver, but just not involved. He was out there for 17 snaps. He ran 11 routes and drew just the 1 target. Limited chances in the debut. Kyle Mananjai, the backup running back, was out there with no Rashawn Johnson. Johnson was out in week 1, and the rookie came away with just 27% snap share and no carries. He was targeted once, caught it for negative 3 yards. Not exactly a breakout performance in his debut. There's a little bit of talent there. If Johnson's back, they're competing for the backup touches, though, behind a guy who gets a fair amount of volume at the running back position and plays a lot of snaps. Do not love anything about that situation. Downboard, not anything to work with here. On the Detroit side of this one, major opportunity with Jahmyr Gibbs at the running back position. He projects out well despite the presence of David Montgomery, who, for the money, also projects out decently well. There's a clear split between the duties here. Gibbs played 66% of the snaps in week 1 to Montgomery's 37%. But Montgomery carried the ball more times. 11 rush attempts to the 9 that Gibbs was given. Neither guy exactly exploded for production. 2.1 yards per attempt for Gibbs. He's quite a bit better than that. 2.3 for David Montgomery. We'll see where that goes. Typically, he's way better than that, but we are aging somewhat. Both guys were involved in the passing game, but Gibbs was more highly involved. He drew 10 targets to the 4 that Montgomery got. Gibbs caught all 10 balls, put up 3.1 yards per target out of the backfield. Didn't score, but the heavy involvement, especially if you're playing in a PPR format like DraftKings, full PPR, 10 targets, 10 catches for a running back, vaults the scoring pretty nicely. Highly involved, highly appealing running back who ranks 4-6 on DraftKings, 4-7 on FanDuel, in stack number 6 by points on DraftKings, stack number 5 by points on FanDuel. Even with the super appealing wide receivers in this offense and the super appealing tight end in this offense, I do think there's room for Gibbs in stacks, and he definitely plays as a standalone running back. Monty, I think, is more standalone running back, and you're just taking shots at a cheap touchdown from the less owned guy, the lighter owned guy, the cheaper guy. He rates out okay, 18-12 on both sides, so he's picking up a little bit for value. Top 12 running back is not nothing. He caught all 4 of his targets. Just on a 1-yard A dot, gained 4.5 yards per target. Not exactly bending the world to his will in the passing game there, but the involvement is nice. It's more padding for him than it's true opportunity, but it definitely works. And then we get to premium receivers with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams. Jameson hit his breakout year last year in year 3. Went over 1,000 yards for the first time. I think it was 1,001 yards exactly. Nice to see the anticipated breakout actually come through, though. Yeah, 58 catches for exactly 1,001 yards. 91 targets, gained 11 yards per target on the season, scored 7 times in his 15 games. Solid breakout season. He slots in as wide receiver 29, 25, and 25 by points, but slips slightly by value, more aggressively on DraftKings at 57. But that is a good player who played 97% of the snaps, drew 5 targets on a 5.2 yard A dot. Typically, he's getting up and down the field a little bit more aggressively than that. I don't think this is any kind of role change. I think it was just the shape of what targeting last week looked like. Goff was a little bit conservative. He threw the ball 39 times and completed 79% of those pass attempts, but threw for just 225 yards, gained 5.8 yards per pass attempt on a 4.2 yard intended air yards per pass attempt. So not exactly slinging the ball downfield like we might normally expect from this team. But that is excellent accuracy, rated out well by CPOE. It's a very strong quarterback option who rates 13th by points on both sides, but again, vaulted up the board in terms of playing within the stack by the quality of the skill players he plays with. Amon-Ra, 6 targets, caught 4 of them. Failed to score, but had a 32.32 yard air yard share. 8.8 yards average depth of target. Down the board, you had Isaac Tesla, who came in his debut, played just 4% of the snaps, was targeted 1 time, and he turned it into a touchdown. He was one of the touchdowns last week? He was on the board. People are aware of him because of that weird name. Isaac, obviously, incredibly weird. I think it's fair to say that Tesla with a capital S in the middle is a little bit strange. I believe it is actually pronounced Tesla, like I said, with the 2 A's there. I'm willing to be wrong about that. Either way, given the almost complete lack of volume outside of the random guy touchdown that he scored, limited as an opportunity in terms of DFS scoring. You've also got Khalif Raymond filling out the depth chart down there. He played 66% of the snaps to the 4% that Slot played, drew 3 targets, was more heavily involved with a 7.7 yard average depth, 14% of the overall air yards, but that is just a limited depth option who rates his wide receiver 70 something on both sides. Samuel Laporta slots in as a high value tight end option. Ranks 4th and 5th by points, 10th and 8th at a very limited position for value. I like the upside there. That is a highly involved receiver. 9 targets in week 1, was second on the team behind Jahmyr Gibbs. Came away with 6 of them, gained 79 yards, a solid 8.8 per target on a 5 yard average depth, 27% of the air yards. Laporta hit pay dirt in 7 different times last year. Gained 726 yards, a solid 8.7 yards per target, holding 60 of 83 targets across 16 games last year. Was a little bit less involved than the year before as a rookie. That season, he had 120 targets, caught 86 of them for 10 touchdowns and 889 yards, 7.4 yards per target. So the yard per target number increased last year. He also dropped fewer passes, 5 drops year one, just 1 last year. So improvement around the edges while the volume came down. He lost nearly 40 targets last season while playing only 1 fewer game. But that is a premium option at the position. He projects out very well. No issues whatsoever with Goff plus 2 stacks, however you want to put them together. I think, Goff, Gibbs, St. Brown works. Goff, St. Brown, Williams certainly works. Goff, either receiver and Laporta definitely works. You probably don't want something like Goff and both running backs, but either running back in any given stack of Lions definitely hits the board a little bit. Bottom end of the board there, not that much involvement. Brock Wright would be a dart throw at a touchdown and limited as far as the projection goes. All right, we're making a dent. We're what? 3 games into the game by game after talking the slate through already. Hour and a half into the show. Not too bad. Making pace. Cap saying Swift revenge spot back in Detroit, if that's a thing for him. Yeah, I don't love the idea of revenge in football, really. You guys know me. I'm not a narrative chaser anyway. I like things we can actually quantify. But in a sport where, there's so many different factors that need to pile up in terms of where are they on the field, down and distance, getting his number called, picking up blocks from 9 different guys ahead of him, that so much is ludicrously out of the control of any of these players that I really don't like narrative-based stuff for football. I think the one spot where it conceivably actually does work a little bit, and still in an unquantifiable way, is in basketball. Most specifically around a point guard, the guy who's going to be out there calling the plays with the ball in his hands to start most of the action. In that sense, I think there's maybe a little something there where you could say, all right, all other things being equal as a tiebreaker, we can look at it. I just don't think that exists in football the way that the sport works. Definitely not something I want to chase anyway. Let's put it that way. Get a little real estate back here. The low-end Cleveland Browns against the former Cleveland Browns. Baltimore comes in with major skills across the board. There are appealing receivers on this team. There is a generational running back on this team. There's a generational quarterback talent on this team. There's a lot to like about Baltimore going up against a defense that was quite good in week 1. Cleveland had just 2 yards per rush attempt and 4.1 yards per pass attempt. Gained 28.6% pressure, came away with 3 sacks in that game. I like those numbers to change pretty aggressively in a matchup against the Ravens here. Jackson, QB1 across the board, heading up stack number 3 by points, stack number 2 by value on the FanDuel slate where everybody's a little bit too cheap, stack 9 by value on DraftKings. They're top 10 in every possible way. Jackson only threw 19 passes in game 1, came away with 2 touchdowns, 11 yards per pass attempt. It's a productive day. 9.1 intended air yards per attempt. Also gained 11.7 yards per rush attempt on 6 carries, gained 70 yards, ran the ball in for a score, 8 yards before contact, 3.7 after. Speaking of an aggressive ground game, Derrick Henry, RB3 by points, 14th by value on DraftKings where he's expensive at 82, 5th by value on FanDuel where he's not that expensive at 9,000. Henry played 57% of the snaps, broke several big runs, came away with 9.4 yards per rush attempt on his 18 carries. Finished the day with 19 potential touches. We don't get a ton of pass volume out of Derrick Henry, but what we do get is major upside for carries and explosive ability to gain yards and punch the ball in for scores. 169 yards total, 4.3 before contact, 5.1 after contact per rush attempt last week. Scored twice on the ground. Ridiculously appealing at the running back spot. And nothing's going to change about that. As long as he's on the field all season long, you can feel confident just putting Derrick Henry into your lineup. I know people are waiting for the crash. One day it will arrive. Judging by week 1, it ain't this year. Zay Flowers at a fair price, ranks 19th by points, 34th by value on DraftKings, where he slips a little bit, but climbs to 11th by value on the FanDuel slate. That's part of where FanDuel gains some ground in the overall stack rating as far as the value number. Flowers is the lead wide receiver in this team, and it's not that close. 90% snap share, was targeted 9 times, caught 7 of them for 143 yards. Solid 10.1 yard average depth of target, gained 52.6% of the air yards last week and scored a touchdown. Dominant potential at the receiver spot. Lamar's favorite target down the field. Mark Andrews is an involved tight end. Drew just 1 target in week 1 while playing 75% of the snaps. Not overly involved that week, but we've seen him provide plenty of scoring potential over the years. Ranks in the top 10 across the board at the tight end spot, top 5 on the FanDuel slate in both positions. Rashad Bateman, just kind of a mixer who does see most of the snaps, 73% in week 1. Caught just 2 of 4 looks, gained just 10 yards. Pretty limited, but did have a solid 10.5 yard average depth of target. But going to be competing for those opportunities with DeAndre Hopkins a little bit. Hopkins played just 35% of the snaps last week, but you can see that increasing a little bit as we go forward. He drew just 2 targets, came away with 35 yards, 17.5 per target. That was on a 16.5 yard average depth of target that got him up and down the field a little bit. And he put one in the end zone. I know people aren't necessarily crazy about DeAndre Hopkins at this point in his career, but I think that is a nice option to, at worst, run alongside Bateman and Flowers and give Lamar another primo receiver to work with. And I think he puts up a fairly healthy touchdown total, even if he doesn't draw tons and tons of targets every week, even if he plays a more limited snap share every week and is just in a tertiary receiving role. I think we get a nice touchdown total out of Hopkins that keeps him relevant throughout the season. Definitely would include in my stacking plans, and you get him cheap, 4,200, 5,100 across sites. Doesn't rate out well. He's, outside the top 50. But just give me that potential touchdown at low ownership. Working down the board, back up Justice Hill, not going to see the ball all that frequently. Carried it twice in week 1 for -7 yards. If that's appealing to you, go for it. Down the board from there, there's really nothing in the Charlie Kolars, Dylan Wallace's, Devontae Walker outside of a dart throw opportunity for a rock bottom free square type of a price. Between those guys, Dylan Wallace did see the field for 31% of the snaps last week. Don't believe he was targeted in the offense. Bear with me with this clicking around, by the way. I didn't take the additional 2 hours that would have required to actually screenshot all these different game log pieces. Usually I've just got them in like a Word doc that I can scroll with fewer clicks, but he played 16 snaps with the offense, but he actually only ran 1 route. So there's really no relevance there. Went untargeted on that 1 route. On this side, Joe Flacco heads up a pretty mediocre offense, slots in his QB 21-21 and 21-20 across sites. I think the quality is hiding here on David Njoku, who lost a little bit of buzz to Harold Fannin, who also rates out strongly at the tight end spot. Fannin was really interesting last time out. Picked up 9 targets, played 72% of the snaps. Not that Njoku was off the field. Njoku played 84% of the snaps. He was targeted 6 times. Fannin just came away with a somewhat more interesting day, hauling in 7 of those pass attempts for 63 yards, 7.0 per attempt on a 7.2 yard ADOT. But Njoku should still continue to see involvement in the offense. He also is capable of getting down the field, more than capable of coming away with a touchdown. So while Fannin is buzzy rather. He's busy too, I'm sure. He's a buzzy pickup. I don't know that we don't want Njoku as the lead here. Scored 5 times last year, 6 the year before that. Was targeted 97 times by this offense last year, 123 times the year before. The 97 came in just 11 games last season. They did go out and sink the 67th overall pick into Fannin. 6'4", 241 out of Bowling Green. He ran 30 routes, over 51 snaps with the offense, Fannin, and came away with the 7 catches over 9 targets. Also carried the ball, gained 3 yards on the ground. Was targeted once in the red zone. That may be where the rubber meets the road between these two through the season. Njoku was not targeted in the red zone. Last season, he picked up a fair amount of his opportunities in red zone packages. So maybe something to watch as far as how the usage flips once they get inside the 20. But I do think there's a healthy back and forth there. Both guys project out well. Fannin jumps to tight end 1 by value on DraftKings, tight end 6 by value on FanDuel. But Njoku's right there, 6'7". Playability on both guys. Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman are your wideouts here to work with Flacco. Both guys hit the board a little bit for value. DK, they're 13 and 12, and they're 15-27 on the FanDuel slate. So you get loose playability in there that explains away the 12th ranked value mark for the Browns on the DraftKings board. They're just 20th by value on FanDuel, and they are limited to 24th, dead last overall for fantasy points. So take the value marks for what they're worth. Flacco threw the ball 45 times, though. Completed 31 of them for 290 yards in week 1. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, just 6.4 yards per pass attempt, and a limited 5.9 intended air yards per attempt. At a point, the wheels are just going to fall off and Flacco won't be able to do it anymore. But right now, still does look capable of delivering a day here and there. He found Jeudy 5 times on 8 attempts. He also found Tillman 5 times on 8 attempts. Between the two, the buzzier Tillman in drafts, Jeudy was just another guy where Tillman was getting a little bit of attention for 3 big weeks last year. He delivered another touchdown, 7.4 yard ADOT, 27.6% air yard share. But between the two, Jeudy was the one doing the work down the field. 12.1 yard average depth of target, 40% of the air yards. Failed to score, but I continue to think he is the true number 1 and the more interesting of these receivers. Tillman, again, just got buzzy because, weeks 13 through 16 last year? Forget which weeks they were. It's in the article. No, it was earlier than that. Weeks 7, 8, and 9 last year. Targeted 8 times for 81 yards in week 7, 7 times gained 99 yards and scored 2 touchdowns in week 8, and 6 targets for 75 yards and a touchdown in week 9. Had the bye week, 2 ineffective weeks, and then was out the rest of the season. So it's just about that 3-week stretch from last year that kind of put him at least a little bit in people's focus for draft season and coming into week 1, and he delivered. So I think given the touchdown, given the 8 targets in week 1, probably picks up a little bit of popularity that we don't necessarily want. While he rates out great and competitively with Jeudy, the points gap does make a difference. And if this guy's going to be as popular, I would lean toward the other one. I would lean toward Jerry Jeudy if Tillman's going to pick up popularity. That said, Tillman remains very, very playable as the true number 2 in this offense. Jerome Ford was a dead spot, 1.3 yards per attempt on his 6 carries. He was the leader in our below. Actually, I think Daniel Jones was the leader, and we got that one pretty wrong. But Ford was a member of the below side of the above-below column, which comes out on Sunday mornings and talks about the difference in projections from our site to what you might see from other places and tries to pick out a few players we're high on and a few players we're low on. Jerome Ford was on that list. Dylan Sampson is potentially a better option at the running back position, but I'm really not looking to get overly invested in the ground game here in Cleveland at all right now. I think it's just a little bit dicey. We've also got Quinshon Judkins is going to make his debut now, I believe. I think I saw that. Yeah, officially active for Sunday as of this afternoon. Judkins was drafted 36 overall in the 2nd round this year out of Ohio State. So there's draft capital there. There's talent invested there. Gained 1,060 yards and scored 14 times in his last year in college. Last year, 1,158 yards and 15 TDs the year before that. 1,500 yards and 16 the season before that. So 3 pretty productive years in college. Do think that's going to thrust him at worst into the mix here, and he might end up actually leading this group. Sampson's also a rookie. He was a 4th-round pick, 126th overall out of Tennessee. Different build, 5'8", 200 pounds versus the 5'11", 221-pound Judkins from the bigger school. So more draft capital, bigger body, different skill set, bigger school. You can see how it leans toward Judkins pretty aggressively, pretty immediately, but we might get 1 week of Sampson being a more lead-oriented player here as Judkins finds his footing. Judkins not on this list yet, by the way. Outside of those guys, Jamari Thrash is a dart throw at best. Targeted once, played 28% of the snaps. No, thank you. Isaiah Bond played 28% of the snaps. 1 target for him as well. They gained 11 yards collectively on those 2 targets. Just limited for opportunities down the board. You want to live in this kind of range. One of the 2 tight ends would be in play. And really, I would stay away from the running backs, especially if I'm stacking. There's just not a ton of opportunity for the running backs here. What did we get target-wise? I guess Sampson did draw 8 targets last week. Caught 8 of them for 64 yards. All right, so given that, if you're stacking a running back into the equation, I guess we go Sampson, but that's pretty thin. I don't have like a ranking, even though we're talking almost exclusively about rankings. I don't have like a end game like we do for baseball. We'll just move on. Denver with Bo Nix at the helm, 340 passes in week 1. Just 1 touchdown through 2 interceptions, gained just 4.4 yards per pass attempt on pretty limited performance, 5.3 intended air yards per attempt. Slots in this week as QB 10 across the board, though. This Indy defense was terrific in limiting Miami pretty aggressively at 4.3 yards per pass attempt, but they did yield a 6.5 yard per rush attempt day. So maybe it's a day where the backs pick up a little bit if that continues to be the trend. Knicks and the passing game take a little bit of a back seat, but I don't necessarily see it that way. I think we see a fair amount of success from Knicks. The opposing defense gained a 19.4% pressure rate. They came away with 3 sacks and 2 interceptions last week. I just think we have a different kind of a week. Everything was going in Indy's favor last week, and I don't think that's going to be the case against Denver here. So I like their offense. I'm a fan of Courtland Sutton. I was on him pretty aggressively in season long. Put up a week 1 touchdown, garnered 48.2% of the team's air yards across 9 targets. 61-yard day, heavily involved, heavily targeted, a lot of opportunities to score in this offense. J.K. Dobbins out-touched R.J. Harvey, but the production swung more in Harvey's way. He gained 70 yards on just 6 carries, 11.7 yards per rush attempt, broke a big one, where J.K. Dobbins gained just 3.9 yards per attempt, but gained volume, carried the ball 16 times, put up 63 yards, 1.8 yards before contact, 2.2 yards after contact, versus the ridiculous 3.0 yards before and 8.7 yards after contact that RJ put up on the shorter volume. Obviously, explosive big runs will skew those numbers somewhat in small samples, but the kid's undeniably talented. There is a little productivity there, and J.K. Dobbins is at best mediocre. So we could see that job, those roles swing pretty aggressively, pretty quickly if that kind of pattern continues. Right now, I think we'll just see what we get out of both spots. They both rank in the mid-20s, and neither is overly appealing outside of maybe Dobbins at 58, ranking 15th on the FanDuel slate by value. Harvey just in the lower 20s on both, or the upper 20s rather on both. Marvin Mims, just a mid-board type receiver, does slide into the top 40, a little bit better than that by value on the DraftKings slate. Played 53% of the snaps last week, drew 4 targets, ran a handful of routes. Has explosive big play ability that we've seen here and there in the past, but just the general reliability and kind of the overall involvement do tend to get a little bit limited. He can disappear out there pretty aggressively. Mims ran 24 routes on his 36 snaps with the offense, targeted 16.7% of the time with the 4 targets over that sample. At the same time, Troy Franklin, who we were on a little bit as the potential lower depth chart option, he ran 26 routes over 41 snaps, He was also targeted 6 times, came away with 4 catches for 44 yards. It's a 23.1% target share, 1.69 yards per route run for the game. It's an interesting enough receiver. Had a solid average depth of target last season, came away in the opener with just a 7.5 yard average depth versus the 8.8 that Mims put up. But both those guys should be capable of going out and getting the ball for Bo Nix throughout the season. Solid mixers in stacks with Nix +2. Evan Engram, the tight end, ranks as a appealing option from the back end of the top 10. Reasonable expectations of productivity. Caught 3 of 4 opportunities in week 1. Didn't really produce anything. Played just 34% of the snaps. He came away with a calf injury. Left in the, I think, 4th quarter. Left later in the game, anyway, with a calf. Was ailing and questionable early in the week, but full practice Thursday, I believe a full practice yesterday. So we fully expect Engram to be out there. He had just 365 yards on 47 catches in his last season in Jacksonville as a 29-year-old. That came over only 9 games last year, though. Was targeted 64 times in that stretch. Scored 1 touchdown. Had 4 touchdown years back-to-back. His most interesting season by far was the 2023 season in Jacksonville that people probably immediately think of. 143 targets that year, gained 6.7 yards per target, put up a 963-yard total on 114 catches, 4 touchdowns. The touchdown output has never, since his rookie year, exceeded that 4. He's hit 4 twice. He put up 6 in his rookie season in New York all the way back in 2017. Was never as interesting as, again, for touchdowns. In Denver, part of the equation here, probably part of the scoring equation once they get in close, but kind of a mixer option at the position, really. Adam Troutman would only be in play for backup duties. Maybe if the calf starts acting up, Engram comes out for a little and you see a little bit more Adam Troutman, but that is a limited option who was targeted once in week 1. On the Indy side, we saw Daniel Jones go off like crazy last week. He completed 22 of 29 passes, 76%, threw for 272 yards against an inept Miami defense. Only threw 1 touchdown pass. 9.4 yards per pass attempt. Can't argue with that. 6.8 intended air yards per attempt is only okay. Not the most accurate QB. Not the best as far as delivering the ball downfield, but capable. He was made more interesting via his rushing. Gained just 3.7 yards per attempt, which is not special, but ran the ball 7 times and punched it into the end zone twice. That's where his scoring actually came from. Unless you can promise me that he's running the ball in at least once, maybe twice every single time, I am not enthused about going back to this spot. I think you got your good game. You say thank you very much, hat tip, and do not mess with the Denver defense. Denver allowed 2.2 yards per per pass attempt last week. They came away with 6 sacks. 3.4 yards per rush attempt. You want to throw Daniel Jones into that meat grinder of a defense? Not this gamer. I don't think I've ever referred to myself as a gamer before. It's an EMAC term. DFS gamers. Can't call ourselves gamblers. Jonathan Taylor's an interesting option at the top of the board. 10th by points, 9th by points on FanDuel. Rates just 17.23 across for value because he's an expensive running back, but he's a super high volume option. 21 potential touches last week, 18 carries, 3 targets in the offense. Came away with 3.9 yards per rush attempt, a solid output, but that needs to be over 4 for the full season. He's very volume driven, though. They feed him the rock, and he delivers. Can definitely put a touchdown on the board for you this week. He would be probably one of the more appealing angles into if somebody's forcing you to play Colts in this one. But the good news is you don't necessarily need to go to any of them. Michael Pittman's a capable receiver, played 82% of the snaps, drew 8 targets, put up 10 yards per target in a productive week 1, scored 6.8 yard average depth of target. For some reason, his, I guess it's the junior, I didn't correct. His total air yards percentage isn't coming up there, but this is a team that can go get the ball down the field aggressively, which is something that we like when they have a more capable, more accurate quarterback in play. When I'm asking Danny Dimes to hit Alec Pierce on a 20-yard average depth of target, I question the reliability there. that's already a shaky proposition in terms of Pierce, when you play him, only really draws 3 or 4 looks a game. But they tend to be of the big play potential look. Deep down the field opportunities just to, drive a stake in for the touchdown. I think Pierce, between him and Josh Downs, for that attribute, is very, very interesting on any given slate in this offense because he's almost always pretty cheap and he's got that huge playability. Downs is a guy who just gets there, more by compiling numbers. 4.3 yard average depth of target in week 1 was a little bit stronger than that for depth of target last season. Picked up 3 targets, played 49% of the snaps as a clear number 3. But a productive receiver on the right day. You catch a few shorter yardage opportunities, especially from a quarterback like Daniel Jones in an offense that now does have a standout go-to tight end. We'll see what that distribution of target share looks like for a guy like Josh Downs. I think Tyler Warren is interesting. Fairly priced across sites. Tight end 3.5 on DraftKings. Tight end 3.3 across on FanDuel. 73% of the snaps in his debut, drew 9 targets, put up 76 yards, 8.4 yards per target. Solid, nearly 24% air yard share. Excellent, intriguing rookie option at the tight end position that finally solves that position for this team. They've been using a multi-tight end rotation for the last 3 seasons. It's been really annoying. A couple of those guys are still on the team, but they're not going to outdraw the rookie. 14th overall out of Penn State, 6'5", 256, big-bodied tight end. Ran 27 routes last week on 50 snaps. And again, targeted 7 times, also carried the ball for 3 yards. Very, very interesting option at the position. On a team that's, we're not really looking to get to. Maybe that's your access point for getting to Indy if you feel the need. He's in play as a bring-back option at a low-end position against any Denver stacks that you build. Pittman's in play for that role, as is Alec Pierce, given the big play potential. But a lot of this is going to ride on the performance of Daniel Jones, and I am not too enthusiastic about it. Definitely need to see it again a couple of times. Had a few days here and there in New York, but largely I've seen a lot of this quarterback, and I know for certain that he is not very good. Has more weapons in Indy, has a better offensive line in Indy, a better running game. So you give him that, but just middle of the board, 18, 19, 19, 23 on the FanDuel slate. Surprise, surprise, Terry's not interested in Daniel Jones. I know. I am very interested in this spot, though. You can see a lot of single-digit numbers across these rankings and a lot of lower double-digit numbers across these rankings on both sides. That is intriguing. 4th-ranked value team on both sides, 8th-ranked by points, so you're getting quality on the Jacksonville side. First across the board out of Cincinnati. Defenses should be somewhat pliable on both sides of this one. Cincinnati did well in week 1. We're going to want to see that again before we give them all that much credit. Jacksonville should be a capable enough offense in terms of being able to beat that team. They generated an 18% pressure rate, which is not overly significant. Came away with 2 sacks, 2 picks. On the other side, just a 12.5% pressure rate from the Jacksonville defense should do wonders for the Cincinnati passing game that evaporated on us in week 1. Just a disgusting week that we were not expecting in any way in that game. But I think redemption is in the cards here for the Bengals. Joe Burrow, top of the board, 3rd-ranked QB by points, 6th and 2nd across sites by value. Comes with primo receiver options. Jamar Chase ranks 1st by points, 4th and 3rd by value across sites. And T. Higgins is also a top 10 points option at the position. Ranks 9th by points on both, 15th and 14th by value. Any combination of those 3 players in your lineups or all 3 of those players in any given lineup, excellent way to build a stack. There is enough volume to go around to support scoring for both Chase and Higgins. A lot of the time you will get one or the other truly going off, but you can get enough support scoring from the other one to fill out a secondary stack as long as some random cheap wide receiver doesn't necessarily explode somewhere else. There are other ways around that, though. Chase Brown is a productive running back who rates 5th, 4th on the DraftKings slate and 5th by points and 1st by value on the FanDuel slate. He's affordable at 68.75 across sites. Carried the ball 21 times last week. Can't really argue with that volume. Gained another 3 potential touches in the passing game as well. Came away with 2 of them for just 8 yards. Light production, but involved. And really, I just want to see the 20-plus carries 21 carries. Didn't do well. Gained just 43 yards, 2.0 yards per rush attempt, just 0.9 before contact and 1.2 after contact. But he punched the ball in for a touchdown, and that matters. Higgins, 4 targets on a 12.3 yard ADOT. Chase, 5 targets on a 17.6 yard ADOT, 52% of the air yards there. There's an obvious 1-1A situation going on here, or a true 1-2 if you really want to be honest about it. But in the absence of Chase, T. Higgins vaults up the board and fills that WR1 role pretty well. He'd be the top receiver on half the teams in the league. Little conflict going on between Mike Gesicki and Noah Fant. Fant played 50% of the snaps to Gesicki's 31%. He also out-targeted Gesicki, 5 targets to 3. Fant scored a touchdown. I do think you'll get a little back and forth going on between those two. Between the two, Gesicki was the guy getting out there into coverage, 8.7 yard average depth of target for 15.3% of the air yards. Should be the bigger play potential guy between those two, but Fant is not bad. Neither guy is at all a priority. Either guy is lightly playable. Andrea Iosivas is another interesting depth option. Was on the field for 65% of the snaps and went untargeted in week 1, which is less than ideal, but that happens to this receiver from time to time. When he does draw targets, he's interesting because he rockets his way down the field and comes away with a healthy touchdown total. He scored 6 times last year. He only caught 36 passes. That's a pretty solid ratio of touchdowns to catches. Caught 36 of 61 targets for 7.9 yards per target, 479 total yards. He had a 10.6 yard average depth of target last season. Dropped a handful. It's obviously problematic. You obviously need a good throw to come with that as well. He had 7 catches on the season of more than 20 yards. And again, he only caught 36 passes. It's a solid mixer as a downfield option who is 3,500 on DraftKings and 4,700 on FanDuel. Much like I said about somebody else in this kind of a role earlier, that's not a guy that needs to be a go-to or needs to be a priority. You're as likely or more likely to get a 0 out of him like you did last week than to get any kind of production. But as a cheap guy to slide in alongside a Burrow Chase stack that leaves T out of it, it's an interesting enough receiver who does see opportunity and does put the ball into the end zone. I think he's a little bit more interesting than the 2 more obvious tight ends that they've got in this offense. Samaje Perine doesn't really hit the board, 43rd ranked across the board, played 25% of the snaps. He draws the occasional target in the offense, but not overly interesting. Nothing else down the board is really interesting. You've got 3 major options, a tight end split, and a dart throw on this team to go with an excellent quarterback option. Should be a much, much bigger week given the 49-point total for this game. Like the upside for that to carry Jacksonville to needing to throw the ball more aggressively than they did last week. Trevor Lawrence threw 31 times, but a conservative 5.7 yards per pass attempt, 7.2 intended air yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception on the board. Didn't fully weaponize his opportunity playing alongside Brian Thomas Jr., fantastic receiver. Thomas Jr. put up a 13.1 yard average depth of target. Came away with just 1 catch on 7 opportunities, though. Going to be a whole hell of a lot better going forward than that. Ranks out as wide receiver 5-3 on DraftKings, 5-4 on your FanDuel slate. Lawrence in the spot above him, 7th by points on both sites, 2nd by value on DraftKings, 4th by value on FanDuel. We're enthusiastic about this spot, given the weapons in this offense. Travis Hunter, a couple spots later, really interesting receiver. Tons and tons of draft pedigree went into that spot. He was targeted 8 times, outdrew Thomas Jr. for targets last week. Came away with 6 catches, just 33 yards, 4.1 per attempt, but a solid 7.4 yard ADOT in his debut. 23.4% of the air yard share. Plays both ways, and that will cut into his productivity from time to time, his availability, but he was out there for 64% of the snaps in the first week. They're talking about getting him more involved in the defense this week, so maybe that has an impact. We don't fully know what that's going to look like yet. But he was out there as a regular full-time wide receiver last week, ran 31 routes over the 39 snaps that he played. Again, drew 8 targets. 4.1 yards per target is not the production we want, but did draw a red zone target in the offense. So heavily involved. Look for him when they got into scoring territory. Can't really ask for more than that from a still affordable WR 2420 and 24th by points and 16th by value on FanDuel. Travis Etienne went off in a big way. 143 yards on the ground on 8.9 yards per rush attempt over 16 carries. 3.5 before, 5.4 yards after contact. Picked up another 3 potential opportunities to get him to 19. Converted all 3 catches. It was for on a negative 3.3 yard average depth, 4.3 yards per target overall coming out of the backfield, but more than enough talent to break a play here and there on that kind of passing opportunity. So that just pads his scoring potential. This was a very nice return to form to see. We're going to need to see him do it again and probably one more time after that before we have full faith. But this is a very talented player, hopefully regaining his stride here. 12-10 on DraftKings, 13-16 at the running back spot on the FanDuel slate. And then had we done season-long draft shows, I would have been telling you how interested in Brenton Strange I was in the run-up to drafts. Ended up, as I think I said on a show recently, I've never in my life drafted a backup tight end in any season-long fantasy football draft, literally ever, in more than like 20 years of playing. I did this year in both my leagues to get to Brenton Strange. In one of them, I cut him before week 1 started and then picked him back up after week 1 was done, but still have him. Really interested in that spot. 79% snap share in week 1. Picked up 4 targets, turned it into 59 yards, 14.8 yards per target. 9-yard ADOT puts him among the more interesting tight ends in terms of the depth of target, the nature of how they use him in the offense. And they like him. They want to get him the ball. I'm not calling for him to be, the new Travis Kelce or anything like that, but I think that's an interesting, underappreciated tight end option in what should be a good stack this week. Stretches this offense out, makes it more playable. Lawrence +2 with either of Thomas and Hunter plus Strange. Thomas and ATN, Hunter and ATN. ATN and Strange would be a weird way to build it, but not an unplayable one. Both of those guys have involvement in scoring potential plays. I like all 4 of those skill players and the quarterback in this offense. And then you have a wild card guy like Diami Brown, who we've found occasional success with from down the board. Doesn't rate out well in this one. 54, 64, 56, 54 across sites, but played 71% of the snaps last week. Drew 4 targets, put up 52 yards, 13 yards per target on a 13.5 yard average depth. If people are sleeping on Diami, just focused on that when going to Lawrence, you can stretch out, throw him into a couple dart share type roles. Lawrence, Thomas, Diami saves you a little bit of money. Obviously, you're making some pretty big sacrifices in terms of potential. You're going to a lower end receiver, but one who was involved. It's not a bad spot as a mixer. Bishal Tootin should fall into the backup running back carries now that Tank Bigsby was sent out of town. They've also got LaQuint Allen in a backup role here. Neither of those guys should be overly DFS relevant this week. We'll see what that workload breaks down as. Allen actually drew more snaps in week 1. Seems likely to flip the other way, though, in week 2. Parker Washington, just a mixer. Played 26% of the snaps, went untargeted. A guy that was kind of on the radar as like a down depth chart type who maybe could get down the field a few times. I think we wait and see it first, given the lack of targets in week 1. Super interesting game, one of the top priority games of the week. Tons of options on both sides of this one. This game is fantastic for bring back plays. Pretty much anytime you're building a Cincy stack, I do think a Jags player should be in it, and that goes double going the other direction. When you're building a Jags stack, you almost certainly want one of Chase Brown or T. Higgins in it. A lot of upside in this game. Jesus, we're only halfway through. 2 hours in. It's going to be one of these long shows, I guess. 4:12. We'll be done in a little bit. It's amazing. I feel like there are fewer guys to talk about, fewer things to say for each game, but damn if these shows don't take longer than baseball does. This game, on the other hand, might not take us all that long to deal with. We do have a top rank for value Calvin Ridley on the board here, though. 14th and 11th by fantasy points, but very, very cheap for the talent. Played 95% of the snaps last week, drew 8 targets, came away with only 4 of them because of the erratic nature of Cam Ward as a passer. Ward threw 28 passes, completed 12 of them, 43%, 112 yards, 4 yards per pass attempt. That came despite a 10.5 yard average intended air yards per attempt. So he was attempting to get the ball down the field. He just wasn't overly successful in it. You can see some of that in the average depth of target on some of these options over here. They were taking some shots, just not really successful shots. Occasionally, that's going to turn into catches. That's going to turn into big play touchdowns. Calvin Ridley, not off the board, despite the guy throwing it to him. As mentioned, Cam Ward, 15th ranked and 10th by value, 16th by value. I'm not overly comfortable with those ratings. This team also stands a little bit taller than I would like in terms of value, but a lot of that's driven by Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, to some degree Chig Okonkwo, to some degree Alec Ayomanor, lesser extent Tyler Lockett. Cam Ward's probably the least interesting part of this stack. I don't love how those ratings look. He's low projected, and I have very little faith. Also didn't run the ball in week 1. Tony Pollard's an interesting running back, though. 16th across the board on DraftKings, 15th and a 6th ranked value spot on FanDuel. He's pretty cheap on the FanDuel slate. He's a productive running back over the last couple of seasons. Carried the ball 18 times for 60 yards in week 1. That amounts to only 3.3 yards per rush attempt, which is not significant. 1.8 before, 1.5 yards after. Was only lightly involved in the passing attack, but gained 29 yards on his 1 target. Game-breaking ability still. A lot of volume still. Affordable at the running back spot. More of a spot filler. Picks up a little quality as a value play on the FanDuel slate. More of a last man in. I've got 2 running backs. I've built out my whole lineup, and now I've got X left over to spend, and I'm just going to put Tony Pollard in the flex role. I think that's exactly what I did in my hand-built placeholder that I've got in. Okonkwo rates out okay, especially for that value mark on DraftKings. Played 88% of the snaps in week 1, caught 3 of 4 targets. Limited as far as the ADOT, the overall air yard share, really needs to fall into the end zone to actually make any kind of value. But he's on the board if you're going to this team and stacking it up. What he's probably not is an appealing standalone tight end. I think you would probably want Okonkwo along for the ride with Cam Ward and one of the other skill players if you're building with him at all. Ayomanor is really interesting. 23rd ranked by value on DraftKings for one thing. Just 46-42 on FanDuel. He's a $4,800 receiver over there. Played 79% of the snaps in week 1 and drew an outstanding 7 targets. He was immediately Cam Ward's favorite target in this offense. Come on, cooperate with me, huh? There we go. Ayomanor ran fast. Ayomanor ran 27 routes, 25.9 yard target, 25.9% target share over those. An unfortunate just 0.48 yards per route run. He only came away with 2 of the 7 targets, which could impact the opportunity, could impact the looks that he gets, the production here in week 2, especially with a veteran like Tyler Lockett below him on the depth chart. But the opportunities were there. How well thrown they were is certainly debatable. Cam Ward did not measure up well in terms of advanced accuracy ratings. That quality is going to come and go, but the fact that they're looking in his direction as a 4th round pick out of Stanford, 136th overall, makes him at least somewhat interesting as a cheapo option at $3,200 on DraftKings. Lockett was limited for opportunities, 58% of the snaps, but was only targeted once, didn't catch it. He picked up 26 routes over 32 snaps, just a 3.8% target share, given the 1 opportunity over those 26 routes. I don't think that's exactly what he signed on for after a pretty productive career out in Seattle. His last year in Seattle, 49 catches in 17 games last year as a 31-year-old. Just 2 touchdowns, by far his lightest contribution in years. Season before had 894 yards on 5 touchdowns on 79 catches. And 4 straight seasons prior to that, over 1,000 yards and at least 8 touchdowns. Once upon a time, very productive receiver, now 32 years old and losing opportunities to Alec Eomanor with Cam Ward throwing him the ball. Not exactly a great recipe for success. He's just cheap on this board. Loosely playable if you're building an abundance of Tennessee stacks for some reason. Biggest Titans fan in the world or whatever. Downboard from there, not exactly appealing options. It's just depth. Jamari DK, I'm going to say. Might be Dyke. Not really sure. Ranks in the 70s across the board. He picked up one target, did not catch it in week one. It was on a 20-yard average depth. And again, they were taking shots to these guys. The 7 targets on a 19-yard average depth of target that went to Eomanor, though, that's where we get interesting, just given the volume over that depth. 45.8% of the air yards went in his direction in his debut performance. It's just turned into nothing. Gunnar Helm, Julius Chestnut, Van Jefferson. There's nothing to see here, folks. On the other side of this one, I left the more interesting team for second. Matthew Stafford, solid veteran quarterback, rates out as QB 16, but picks up a lot of ground as stack 5, stack 6, given the strength of the skill players on this team. You've got a elite target volume option in Puka Nacua. Targeted 11 times last week, came away with 10 catches. Monster for PPR scoring formats. Rates out as wide receiver 3 by points, wide receiver 10 by value on DraftKings, 3.7 on the FanDuel slate. Came away with that 42.79% air yard share, but failed to score last week. Stafford completed 21 of just 29 passes, threw for 245 yards, threw a touchdown, a very solid 8.4 yards per pass attempt. All of that is perfectly fine. We just need a little bit more volume out of this passing game. We need to see a little bit more production go toward Devontae Adams. He was targeted 8 times, but came away with only 4 catches. 51 yards is all right. Had a solid 30.57% of the air yards. And if you look, if we're combining these two numbers, that is a 73.36% of the air yards went to either Nacua or Adams. And then further down the board is, who is this? Davis Allen. Backup tight end who only drew 2 targets, but on a 17.5 yard ADOT, put up a 15.28 air yard share and scored one of the random guy touchdowns of the week. He operates behind Tyler Higbee as the true backup in that offense, but that was a frustrating one. And I forgot to mention when we were talking about the Jags. Dumbass, what's his name down the depth chart? Hunter Long. He caught Brenton Strange's touchdown and took quality away from our guy Brenton Strange. We're still angry about that. 1 target, caught it for 6 yards and a score. Otherwise, entirely uninvolved on a 9% snap share. One of the bigger guys to score last week. Higbee's still an involved tight end, but doesn't exactly rate out great. Just a part of the offense. You can throw him into stacks. But I would rather have either of the wide receivers. Yeah, fully healthy. Ran 19 routes on 33 snaps in week 1. Just went untargeted. But if you want to swing some of the opportunities, the 2 opportunities and the depth and the opportunity to score a touchdown that went to Davis Allen in Higbee's direction, it easily puts him on the board. I would call either of those a touchdown dependent guy, but Higbee is the true starter. Tutu Atwell's just kind of a mixer. Lost in the 60s as far as the rankings board goes. Just drew 1 target on a 4-yard average depth of target. Was better for the full season last year at getting out and getting down the field. Was an occasionally interesting, occasionally involved receiver. But once we're getting away from the top end options for volume, we get very, very thin on this Rams offense. Nacua demands targets. Devontae's going to demand targets all season long. And then they've got a very high volume running back. Kyron Williams carried the ball 18 times last week, also picked up 2 targets. He finds success via volume. 3.7 yards per rush attempt is around what he normally is. But given the number of carries and the frequency with which he scores touchdowns, he's always involved. He's always at least on the board for DFS scoring. One of the lighter options in my mind when I go to actually build lineups just because of his limitations as a runner. but the volume does push him up the board. He ranks 7th and 6th by points, 3rd on the DraftKings value board at running back, 9th on the FanDuel board. Going to be in play. What he's not really is a priority when you build stacks around Stafford. I think Kyron Williams tends to function better as a standalone running back who picks up 18 to 20 carries, totals out to decent yardage totals despite limited yards per attempt, and tends to punch one in for a score. You pick that up in another random lineup rather than stacked where he's not really producing much in the passing game, not really helping Stafford to scoring, and taking a potential touchdown away from somebody else. Just seems to work better that way. So if we're stacking Rams, we want to get Stafford plus 2s with Nakua and Adams, or one of those two guys. You could go skinny with that stack. You can revolve around a Puka and Higbee, less so one of the receivers and Atwell, but that would be the limitation of where I would stretch to in this offense. And then maybe you throw in like a dart throw around a very cheap Davis Allen and just hope and pray you get another random guy touchdown. He was at least involved and, a significant average depth of target. Rams play up way better than the Titans on the other side. I don't think you necessarily need bring back plays from the Titans if you play Rams. But that said, Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, maybe to some degree Alec Manor, all interesting in that role. So I would go that route. They're all affordable. Going the other way, if you play any stacks of Tennessee at all, you almost certainly want some Rams in there. Talked about this game loosely up top. I am intrigued by the New England option here. Drake May ranks 11th at the quarterback position by points, 3rd and 9th across the board on value. He threw 46 passes in week 1. Completed 30 of them. That's 65%. It's not terrible. 6.2 yards per pass attempt on a 7.9 intended air yards per attempt. Gained 287 yards in the passing game. That's relatively decent production. Seems to have established an immediate connection with Keyshawn Boutte this year. He was a hot commodity on this week's waiver wire. Boutte came away with 103 yards on 6 of 8 receiving. 12.9 yards per target, 17.1 yard average depth for nearly 40% of the air yards in this offense. There's a very interesting receiver who happened to not find the end zone last week, but has scoring potential. Demario Douglas was more involved in this offense last year, but came away with 7 targets. It's not the quarterback's fault that he only, well, maybe it is the quarterback's fault. I don't know what the nature of those throws were, but he only came away with 2 receptions. Just a 4.6 yard ADOT operating on short opportunities. Did score their lone touchdown in the offense, of course, because that's just how these things go. But more of a mixer in this offense. Guy who pretty much underwhelmed was Stephon Diggs. Played 56% of the snaps, caught 6 of 7 balls for 57 yards, 8.7 yard ADOT for 17.6% of the air yards. Just didn't get out there and win a bunch of routes. Didn't get out there and really stand out from the crowd. Slots in as just wide receiver 33, 31, 34, 38 on the FanDuel side. I think either of those guys are playable and they're mandatory in stacks with Drake May, but neither guy really separates from the crowd. If we're just looking at pure rankings, they're both kind of mid-level type options. And I think that's, as I said earlier, that's a part of what drags down the overall stack ranking here. It's difficult to get this to truly reflect the potential for like underlying opportunistic quality rather than just reflecting the median projections, which is what it needs to do. So I think there's more quality hiding on the Patriots side. And again, we just saw Daniel Jones, who has similar skill set to Drake May, eviscerate this team last week. Could be a big one in the cards for the Pats. Trevain Henderson, fairly priced across sites, RB23 on DraftKings, jumps up to RB13 by value on the FanDuel slate. Got in for just 35% of the snaps last week. Gained 5.4 yards per rush attempt, but carried the ball only 5 times. 27 yards for the game, but an interesting 4.6 yards before contact, only 0.8 yards after. Picked up a little bit of opportunity as well in the passing game. 6 catches on 6 targets is interesting. Helps pad PPR scoring somewhat. You could see a little bit of separation between him and a still on the team, but still wildly uninteresting Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre played 65% of the snaps, gained just 2.1 yards per rush attempt on 7 carries. 3 targets in the offense, remains wildly uninteresting and limited as far as production goes. Hunter Henry's an affordable tight end. 13th, 20th on DraftKings, 13th, 12th on FanDuel, puts him more on the board on the blue site. 93% of the snaps in week one, picked up 8 targets, caught only 4 of them, but a very heavily involved tight end option who does get down the field, 14.5 yard average depth of target, good for 33.9% of the air yards last week. Don't sleep on Hunter Henry if you're going to this offense. That's really the last guy not to sleep on, though. I do like the idea of combining Drake May with Keyshawn Boutte, and then maybe you drag a second guy from the receiving core into that. Maybe it's Hunter Henry for a cheap price down here. Douglas Diggs, there's a little bit of back and forth between those guys. What I don't necessarily know if I want to do is pad out a running back into these stacks. Maybe given the involvement that Henderson saw in week one, you go that direction. But it's probably best left to the passing game because as part of our equation here for success, for it to look like Daniel Jones' performance last week, we do want Drake May running the ball more than he did in week one, which is part of his skill set. Just 2.8 yards per rush attempt over 4 carries, limited to 11 yards in week one, capable of blowing the doors off that total this week. If we're going to anything Miami, and I think if we build up some Patriots stacks, we could consider some bringbacks around Devon Achane and maybe Tyreek Hill, maybe some Jalen Waddle. Those are still 3 elite skill players. Achane ranks 6'5" on DraftKings, 7'8" on FanDuel. Top 10 receiver in terms of fantasy points for Tyreek Hill while slipping down the board a little bit for value. And then a top 30 option who vaults all the way to 9th by value on FanDuel in Jalen Waddle. Waddle picked up 5 targets, gained just 30 yards last week, 4.2 yard average depth of target. It's been lost for the better part of a season and change now, but a very talented player at a very fair price, especially on that blue site, puts him in play. And if Tua finds any kind of success in what should be a better game this week, there are definite opportunities to emerge for Jalen Waddle. Tyreek Hill is still a big play receiver, had a 14.3 yard average depth of target last week, caught 4 of 6 opportunities, 38.57% of the air yards, just didn't happen to break one, didn't score, but again, the favored target of Tua Tagovailoa at the quarterback position, definitely an upside wide receiver play on any given slate, and still has that explosiveness. HN, as the lead back in this offense, played 73% of the snaps, gained a whopping 7.9 yards per rush attempt. Should have probably given them the ball more frequently, but they got smoked last week and the game script just fell apart on them. 7 carries, gained 2.7 yards before contact, 5.1 yards after, as if to make the point. 4 targets in the passing game. He is a heavily involved running back in the passing attack. You can absolutely always include HN in stacks of Dolphins. He becomes even more appealing for PPR format scoring, given the involvement in the passing attack. And he finds touchdowns that way as well. He scored in the offense. He was the lone Dolphin to do anything of interest in the offense last week. Tua threw the ball just 23 times, 114 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions, just 5 yards per pass attempt. Ugly week for Chad Pennington 2.0 here, with more concussions. Down the board, Ollie Gordon didn't really stand out from the crowd, just 25% snap share, carried the ball twice, didn't do anything with it, picked up 1 target in the offense. You did get 4 targets go to tight end Tanner Connor with Julian Hill as the secondary option. Those guys are backing up, filling in for Darren Waller, who's on IR. I would continue to lean in Connor's direction if I need anything at all from the tight end position, just given the snap share and the targeting, but he was not an overly involved option. Nick Westbrook-Akini would just be a total dart throw. Guy we've seen produce in spots over the years, but limited to 2 targets, caught 1 of them for 7 yards, 44% snap share. Weak option down the board. Kind of like New England, even though Miami's got the 3 better skill players, top 3 skill players in this game are all on Miami. Doesn't necessarily make them the better stack, even though they rate out better. Doesn't necessarily make them the better stack. 9th, 10th, 9th, 7th. I'm kind of intrigued by the bad team on the other side, I got to say. I think the Dolphins function a little bit better, probably, as standalone options. HN in any given lineup, Hill, Waddle in any given lineup, especially on FanDuel with that value rating. Makes those guys interesting. They are playable, though, as a stack. I don't want to take them off the board. They're a top 10 stack this week. Going up against the defense that allowed a 4th-ranked 2.3 yards per rush attempt in week 1, but a ridiculous 9.8 yards per pass attempt. Could definitely help out with the scoring potential of the Miami Dolphins in week 2. Just a few games to go. Potential, thank you, Legalized. You said that almost an hour ago, but I appreciate it. Michael Knack, your comments were being removed? I don't know if you're still here, buddy. I wasn't doing it. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for anybody new out there. The site is rotoscouts.com. Probably haven't mentioned that enough times during this marathon. Check everything out over at Roto Scouts. Baseball and football are going on right now. All yours for under $1 a day. You get both those sports. When basketball and hockey start back up, those are also included for that same subscription price. Under $1 a day, all access, all in pricing, no per sport bullshit. Not trying to break the bank, trying to be totally reasonable, cater to the 80-85% of people out there who aren't looking to build 150 lineups, aren't looking to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on their projections every month. One of these things not quite like the other. Dallas Cowboys coming in as a really interesting opportunity here. 4th ranked for points, 8th ranked for value on DraftKings, 3rd on the FanDuel value board. Several of their players in single digits as far as those rankings go. CD comes in as the wide receiver 2 across the board for points and value on both sites. Dak, quarterback 6 by points, 4 and 3 by value. Couple spots down from there. Jake Ferguson, the tight end, rates as tight end 2 by value on DraftKings, tight end 4 by value on FanDuel, and sits as tight end 7 just by raw fantasy points. That's a good option at that position. George Pickens rates out as a playable wide receiver who jumps a little bit by FanDuel value and is 27th by points at the position. Javonte Williams had a productive week 1, but kind of a mixed bag as a mid-ranked running back. Probably my least favorite of their prominent players. Williams gained 54 yards, had a decent day, but it amounted to only 3.6 yards per rush attempt over his 15 carries. Just happened to punch the ball in twice. I continue to feel that he's this is a realistic yards per attempt expectation for him. That's about what he's been in the past. 1.8 yards before, 1.8 yards after contact. Going to rely on punching the ball in. But if he happens to fall into the end zone a bunch of times this year, that immediately puts him on the board because this team should be doing a fair amount of scoring. It's an aggressive passing attack. They threw the ball 34 times in what should be considered a fairly light day for them. Dak only threw for 188 yards, failed to throw a touchdown pass, didn't throw an interception, gained 5.5 yards per pass attempt, but 9.7 intended air yards per attempt. Didn't connect for the big play with CeeDee Lamb. Missed him on a couple balls that would have made both of their days look quite a bit better. CD was targeted a massive 13 times in the offense. He came away with 7 catches, still gained 110 yards for the day, 14-yard ADOT, and a nearly 55% air yard share. It's just a couple of those overflew him and led to a slight disappointment. Assuming those are properly delivered this week against an inept Giants defense that's good up front but limited otherwise, this could be a huge, huge day for the Dak to CD connection. Pickens is a capable receiver. He played 92% of the snaps in his debut with the Cowboys. Just targeted 4 times, gained 30 yards on 3 catches, a very solid 13-yard ADOT. Only amounted to 15.7% of the air yards because just everything went through CD. But assuming a little bit of a pickup in volume on that kind of an ADOT, these numbers will balance out a little bit. Probably cools to 35%, 22, 23% down here. But Pickens, the clear number 2 receiver in this offense and a talented receiver who is finally free of the shackles of Pittsburgh. Ferguson had a good day, 6 targets, 5 catches. Didn't score, but a solid 5.8 yard average depth, was an involved and targeted receiver a little bit down the field, and is a frequently targeted option in the red zone for this team. That should be, assuming full health this year, a pretty decent option for scoring to pad out Dallas stacks throughout the year, where you're not necessarily going Dak, CD, and Pickens. If you just pivot slightly to Ferguson on any given lineup, I think you retain similar kind of scoring potential and maybe offset your ownership and your leverage number a little bit. Ran 27 routes, picked up a 22.2% target share over the 42 snaps. Caught 5 of 6 targets in week 1. Last year famously failed to score a touchdown, but caught 59 of 86 opportunities, 5.7 yards per target for 494 yards. Season before, caught 71 balls in 17 games, scored 5 times. That's what we're looking for this season, that kind of productivity, if not a little bit more in the touchdown department. I think Dallas has interesting third and fourth options at the wide receiver position. Neither one rates out particularly well. Both guys saw 2 targets, played fewer than 50% of the snaps, both landing in the mid-40s. A little bit of back and forth there. Neither guy distinguished himself for average depth of target. But Jalen Tolbert would draw a little bit more of downfield looks, while Kevonta Turpin, more a gadget player with extreme upside to break a play. I think between the two, he's slightly more interesting because he does handle the kick returning. And with the new rules, we're seeing a fair number of opportunities and productivity go to kick returners. Not that those immediately count for scoring, but against a bad team like the New York Giants, you can see it in the cards. The opportunity to take one to the house on the kick return is very much present. So that makes him somewhat interesting and an interesting wild card pairing with the Dallas defense, which is definitely in play here. Miles Sanders, a capable backup, but if we're going to this team, given the touchdown scoring that Javonte carried with him in week 1, I think we do have to default in that direction. Sanders right now, just a mixer. He gained a ridiculous and unsustainable 13.3 yards per attempt, but only carried the ball 4 times for his 53 yards. 10.3 yards before contact is not going to carry through the season. More to the point, he only played 18% of the snaps. He picked up 1 target in the passing game. He's a more talented player than that. They got to work him in around the edges, but until we really know what that week-to-week role is going to look like, I don't think you're wasting running back shares there. Everybody else, just a backup. On this team, we are almost exclusively interested in this player and this player alone. I think he makes a fine bring back play in stacks of Cowboys if you want to get to him going the other way. Totally reliant on a terrible Russell Wilson to actually deliver him the ball, which he succeeded in doing only 5 times last week over 12 attempts. Russ came away with a 46% completion rate. He did throw the ball 37 times. The volume was there. The productivity was not. 4.5 yards per pass attempt on a 4.5 intended air yards share, or air yards per attempt. That is just not going to pay the bills. Russ Wilson, pretty shot. Ranks his quarterback 19-18, 18-15 across sites. We may see Jackson Dart as early as this week. The fans are calling for it. The media is calling for it. Not that any of that truly matters. Unfortunately, I'm not sold. We'll see what that looks like. I don't think you play it. I think the best opportunity, and I said this in the article, which is up for you to read on the website, game-by-game breakdown with full game notes for all of these, saying more than I'm saying here. I'm saying a lot here. I think the best opportunity for Malik Nabers to find his true potential and really succeed this year is to get Jameis Winston some reps at the quarterback spot. He's 3rd on the depth chart right now. I'm not sold on the rookie. I'm sorry. I'm really not. We'll see what it ends up looking like, but definitely not with Russ. You're not playing Dart on the hope that he gets into the game. So Nabers is limited only by the potential of the quarterback he's on the field with. He is fantastic. He is by far the volume leader on this team, 12 targets last week. You did have 5 targets go in the direction of Tyrone Tracy because they were slinging the ball all over, but that wasn't a successful venture. 2 completions, 11 yards gained. Decent PPR upside from time to time for a cheap Wan'Dale Robinson. That keeps him alive for DraftKings shares. He caught 6 of 8 targets last week. Didn't do much with them. 3.1 yard average depth, a 14.29% air yard share because everybody else sucks. But Wan'Dale's really only interesting for catch volume rather than any kind of quality expectations there. Darius Slayton, worse than Wan'Dale. Jalen Hyatt, quite a bit worse than Darius Slayton. Cam Scatterbo didn't really get involved, 12% snap share in week 1. He's an interesting enough back if he picks up opportunities, but right now he's just kind of relegated behind Tyrone Tracy. Tracy, 19-13 and 19-10, does pick up a little bit of value-based opportunity, I guess. Played 74% of the snaps, carried the ball just 10 times and gained just 2.4 yards per rush attempt, 0.9 before and 1.5 yards per attempt after contact. He is involved in the passing game. He was targeted 5 times, but again, only caught 2 of them and gained 11 yards. It's just a lousy team. There's really no intriguing reason to go here that isn't named Malik Nabers. And anybody who draws anything wearing blue is probably just playing Malik Nabers. I think he's most functional going back against this team in stacks of Cowboys and then just in random lineups on his own. Cowboys in a big way against my Giants here, though.
Remember that movie, My Giant? Billy Crystal, George Mirasan? They should remake that with Boban. Boban and Sandler are apparently friends. They could do that. Adam Sandler in the Billy Crystal role. I like that idea. Cap likes Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart is going to be the truth. Believe it. Get Russ the F out of here. I agree with the last part. Get Russ out of here. I just wanted Jameis Winston to be the caddy until they drafted a highly capable quarterback with an early first-round pick. I think we're just kind of settling back into Daniel Jones type territory with this Jackson Dart idea. We'll see. I'm willing to give the kid a chance. I was willing to give Danny Dimes a chance until he proved to me that he doesn't play the position all that well. So we'll see what we get. But if you remember going back a couple of years, I was very much saying in 2 years, Jameis Winston is going to be playing quarterback in a caddy season for the Giants before they go out and draft Arch Manning. We'll see what Arch turns into. How did his subsequent games go? I know week 1 was a disaster. Oh, I guess he's playing right now. So I don't know if Archie's going to be the answer any more than Jackson Dart at this point, but that was my initial thought, was that was how they were going to play that and have Arch force his way to New York like Eli did. Right now, we'll see what we get. Anyway, super interesting game, Super Bowl rematch, Philly at KC. Top-end players across the board in the key positions as we know and love. Patty Mahomes ranks QB 8 on both sites. 14th and 12th as an expensive option at the position. Slots in with question marks in a number of his skill positions. Still his old running mate Travis Kelce, and Kelce's difficult to suppress for quality. Ranks second on the board on both sides for points, third and second across the board for value. He was targeted just 4 times in the opener. Did manage to put up 46 yards on 2 catches, 11.8 yards per target, but that's because he broke one a little bit. 6-yard average depth of target, but did punch one in for a score. That's really what he needs to do, but just looks disengaged. I did it again. Damn it. I did that in the article. I started typing disengaged and then just left it as like a haha and said like uninterested or whatever. But yeah, just, a lot of distractions in his life. He has admitted to being distracted over the last couple of seasons. And then, like I said the other day, went out and got himself engaged to the most famous person in the world right before the damn season started. I just don't think we're getting full participation out of Travis Kelce most of the time. Still excellent, still very much in play, affordable, the ideal pairing with Patty Mahomes, but that's where everybody goes. Mahomes completed 24 of 39 passes in week 1, threw for 258 yards, 1 touchdown on the board, just 6.6 yards per pass attempt, but the volume was nice. Spread the ball around pretty aggressively. You had the ridiculous 16 targets that went in Hollywood's direction, but when I say spread the ball around, you have a lot of targets to other receivers. Nobody really stood out for more than 5 opportunities, but he did throw multiple opportunities to each of these guys. So there's a little bit of interesting action going on down the depth chart. I don't think Hollywood draws 16 targets again, but he should probably lead the team. Played 93% of the snaps last week, gained 99 yards on his 10 catches over those 16 targets, just a 6.3 yard aid up, but the volume got him to 37.27% of the air yards. I think the guy who's actually kind of interesting for air yards, for a little bit of sneaky explosive play upside, a guy they looked for 4 times down the field last week, Tyquan Thornton. After Worthy was out of the game, Thornton got several designed looks down the field, taking shots. He came away with 2 catches, gained 41 yards, 10.3 yards per target, 28.8 yard average depth of target. That is getting down the field, guys. That's a third of the football field. 42% air yard share, despite only being targeted 4 times. If Mahomes is going to continue to uncork opportunities in the direction of that receiver, consider me interested. He rates out at just 63, 66, and 60, 58. He's not on the board as far as those ratings go, just a middling type projection. But this rockets up the board if he makes 1 big catch for a 30-something yard touchdown. That is an interesting value that is more than a dart throw. I don't like the running back situation on this Chiefs team. Pacheco, limited, just carried the ball 5 times, picked up another 3 opportunities in targets. He gained 5 yards per rush attempt. You would like to see them give him the ball more. Didn't look right coming off of last year. when he returned from injury. We'll see what it looks like in a go-forward sense this week. I don't think we saw enough of it to truly evaluate last week. Kareem Hunt matched his opportunities. He also carried the ball 5 times, picked up 3 targets in the passing game. 3.2 yards per attempt out of Hunt, but they started giving Hunt the ball more as they closed in on the end zone. Not necessarily sure that's a correct strategy. Juju Smith-Schuster, involved in the offense in week 1, doesn't exactly rate out well in week 2, but played 80% of the snaps, targeted 5 times and caught all 5 of them for 55 yards, just a 5.8 yard average depth of target. He's going to fill that gadgety slot receiver kind of role in short yardage, but capable of breaking a big one. He's not Xavier Worthy in that sense, but not completely unfamiliar with the offense, not completely incapable as a down depth chart receiver. Noah Gray gets the occasional look as the backup tight end. He played 41% of the snaps. When he draws red zone targeting is really when he becomes interesting, or if we see something happen to Kelsey. Last week, just 1 target as they spread the ball out a little bit. Wasn't all that interesting, but the snap share is fair for a cheap backup tight end. You can do worse if you're just throwing darts at the position, but Gray functions a lot better when we get this team as a showdown slate play. Everybody else, just filler. Saquon Barkley, running back 1-1 on DraftKings, running back 1-2 on your FanDuel slate, playing in stack 2-3 on DraftKings and stack 2-5 on FanDuel. This Eagles team is potentially elite once again, and they are loaded with options. Looks like a very high quality spot in one of the higher scoring potential games of the week. Saquon carried the ball 18 times last week, was greatly diminished in terms of his actual output with just 3.3 yards per rush attempt. But we know that that's going to change unless something is actually wrong, and I don't think anything is wrong. So we should see a return to form in terms of the production over the volume. Volume was right where it belongs. 18 carries, 5 targets in the passing game, 23 potential touches. He was operating in that kind of territory all season long while dominating the league for 2,000 plus yards last year. Ridiculous talent, ridiculous option at scoring. Should still be a New York Giant. Not bitter, I swear. Jalen Hurts, QB4 across sites by points, carried up the board by his quality of skill players, completed 19 of 23 pass attempts, 83% in week 1, only threw for 152 yards, failed to throw a touchdown pass, didn't throw an interception, 6.6 yards per pass attempt, found Saquon a handful of times, found Devontae Smith a couple of times, mixing and matching his way to a few receptions with Jahan Dotson, getting involved on a couple plays and a big average depth of target. The guy he, for some reason, chose to ignore for the most part is his best receiver. A.J. Brown was targeted only once. Caught it, 8-yard gain, 8.99 yard percent of the air yards. A.J. with a much better crack at it again this week, comes in as wide receiver 8 and 7 across sites by points. Loses some ground on the value rating, 26th and 23rd to Devontae Smith's 25 and 28th value rating. But between the two, AJ is still the true number 1 receiver here. Uber talented at getting open. Should see plenty of opportunities as the season goes on, and the prime target for Jalen Hurts when he's throwing the ball. Hurts found a lot of quality in terms of his ability to run with the football. 4.4 yards per rush attempt over 14 carries from the quarterback in week 1. Gained 62 yards. 2 yards before contact, 2.4 yards after. Outdid Saquon on the ground in week 1. Scored 2 touchdowns with his legs. Elite production, punching the ball in for scores as an individual. It makes Hurts playable as a naked quarterback, though the talent around him makes it more appealing as a stack still, even with his individual upside. He ran the ball in a ludicrous number of times last year. Capable on anything once they get in close, from the controversial tush-push play to naked bootlegs and so on. Just utterly elite, possibly the best I've ever seen at running the ball into the end zone from the quarterback position. And a very capable passer. He does not get enough credit for his passing quality. That is an excellent quarterback to go to. AJ or Devontae at different prices, either direction. Both in a fair number of stacks of Jalen Hurts absolutely play up despite the lack of quality, the lack of volume, the lack of production last week. You can absolutely go to the well with both of those receivers in a +2 stack. As somebody mentioned, Dallas Goedert, the starting tight end, out this week. I don't necessarily know that thrusts Grant Calcaterra upon us. He rates out okay, limited backup tight end. didn't draw a target in week 1 despite playing 59% of the snaps, but has been involved in the past in this kind of a backup role when Goddard is out. But what that's typically going to lead toward is just more opportunity for Saquon, for A.J. Brown, for Devonta Smith. And then Jahan Dotson, not uninvolved, 46% of the snaps, just targeted 3 times, but it came on a 16-yard ADOT that garnered him 53.93% of the air yards because they weren't throwing the ball to the other guys. 19.7 yards per target, gained 59 yards on his 3 catches. If he's going to be involved at all like that, that makes him interesting as a depth receiver for a cheap pairing in a Hurts +2. If you want to get away from one of the 2 big receivers from the cost associated with going with one of them, or if you want to get away from like a Jalen, Saquon, AJ build that would be really, really expensive, pivoting to Dotson is a reasonable move to make. Kylen Granson will play second fiddle to Grant Calcaterra at the tight end spot. And then backup running back wise, we have Tank Bigsby on this team now. Shipley got hurt, so he's not available. Little bit of a job back and forth between Bigsby and A.J. Dillon, who was the backup in week 1 behind Shipley. He played 13% of the snaps. Bigsby on Jacksonville played 21%. The Eagles, when they first made the trade, said that they were not trading for Bigsby because Shipley was hurt, that they were trading for Bigsby to return kicks for them. I think they were lying. I think Bigsby becomes the running back 2 here, at least until Shipley is back. But it's a firm we'll see, and I don't think you're playing either one of those guys to find out. Cap says Brown's going 0-17 for Arch. You won't get him. Possible, but let's remember that Uncle Eli was drafted by the San Diego Chargers and refused to play for them, got himself traded to New York before the season. Let's just remember the Manning family does have that kind of pull regardless of where those numbers might fall. Eagles, in a big, big way, right out as one of the top options of the week. Chiefs a little bit less so, but we know that this guy's super talented and can carry a couple of those guys along for the ride with him. Should be a good game for stacking purposes. At worst, the Chiefs offer a few reasonable bring back plays in stacks of Philly, especially when you don't have the go-to tight end over here. Maybe you just plug Kelsey in. Kelsey's affordable for his quality. That is an affordable rating. Let's get to the final 2 games here. I really have to pee, but I'm not going to do it until we're done. Or maybe I'll do it before we're done, but I'm not getting out of this chair. Aaron Rodgers, I remain skeptical. He's going up against the defense that allowed 7.6 yards per pass attempt to rank 24th last week. They came away with 1 sack despite a significant pressure rate. Did come up with 2 picks. Maybe that plays up a little bit against Rodgers, but it could be another week where Rodgers looks pretty effective. He threw for 244 yards and 4 touchdowns in week 1. Not the game I was looking for out of Aaron Rodgers. Bent the day a little bit. 22 of 30 passing. Solid day. 8.1 yards per pass attempt. Just 4.6 intended air yards per attempt. Maybe something there. Did get a little bit of benefit from some talented receivers. But he's in play. He spread all 4 touchdowns around to different receivers, which helps as far as multiple options in a stack. He's got a capable DK Metcalf, who rates as a wide receiver 16-14 for points across sites, worse than that for value. Metcalf was targeted 7 times to lead the team, came away with 83 yards on 4 catches. Short yardage, just a 4-yard ADOT. The only guy who got into a double-digit average depth of target was Calvin Austin III. He was targeted 6 times on a 14-yard average depth of target for a ridiculous 65.6% of the air yards. That's not a sustainable number. This team's going to have to throw the ball downfield to somebody else. But for now, it keeps Austin interesting at a fair price. You can see where he lands on the board just inside the top 50 in most of those categories. He's only a mixer, but he played 80% of the snaps, drew a fair snap share, and the depth of target with a still capable Aaron Rodgers throwing that ball does keep him somewhat interesting. Rodgers was more erratic when they went downfield as far as being able to actually complete those passes. A lot of his accuracy came on the shorter attempts, but he's capable of unleashing the ball and just uncorking those big throws when he needs to still. Jalen Warren was extremely limited in the ground game. Carried the ball just 11 times, 3.4 yards per rush attempt. Not exactly appealing. He did score a touchdown on his 2 targets in the passing game. Just a 1.5 yard average depth coming out of the backfield, but punched one into the end zone, which adds to the appeal somewhat, but that is a low-end option at the running back position where he picks up ground is in the value rating, 7th by value on DraftKings, 4th by value on FanDuel because he's pretty cheap. I don't love the 45% snap share. I don't love the fact that we're competing now with Kenny Gainwell, who is an equal talent. Gainwell slots in as the RB2. He beat out Caleb Johnson for that role. Johnson played just 4% of the snaps to Kenny Gainwell's 54%. Gainwell put up just 2.7 yards per rush attempt on his 7 carries to the 11 carries that the starter got. But that's not all that disparate as far as what the opportunity looked like. He was also targeted 4 times in the passing game, failed to score negative 2.5 yard average depth of target out of the backfield. But that is an involved runner who could cut into the workload of Jalen Warren. And that's a guy that we've seen in a job share not really find that much success over the last couple of seasons in Pittsburgh when Najee Harris was in town. Now he's just dealing with a different guy, taking opportunities away from him. Not a great spot. Jonnu Smith is an interesting tight end. He got into the end zone in week 1, was targeted 6 times, came away with 5 of them. 15 yards for the game, 2.5 yards per target is kind of limiting. It was a negative 1 yard average depth of target. So he's doing a lot of his work, again, on short looks and then having to make something happen or just stumble his way into the end zone. But he's capable of doing that again this week, and he's a fairly priced tight end. Slots in as 9-12 at the position on DraftKings, 10 across the board on FanDuel, playable. Patty Freiermuth kind of falls by the wayside if we're going in the other direction, but he stays on the board at least a little bit. He played 50% of the snaps, drew 3 targets, caught all 3 of them for 28 yards, technically the more productive yardage day between the 2 tight ends. 6.7 yard average depth of target, so he was actually getting out beyond the line of scrimmage a few yards and then attempting to catch the ball as well. Kind of makes him a little bit more interesting than the way they utilize Jonnu, outside of the fact that Jonnu is the more targeted guy and got into the end zone. Jonnu scored, Warren scored, Calvin Austin scored, and the other touchdown went to Ben Skoranek. Another Joe random-ass touchdown. 1 target for the week, came away with a 22-yard catch, 9-yard average depth of target, took it to the house for a score. Good for him. I don't think we're aggressively going to Ben Skoranek, who ranks in the 80s across sites. Played just 18% of the snaps last week. If you're going Steelers, it's Aaron Rodgers. Plus 2s are in play, but probably best as a skinny stack, considering how much of his actual success came on short yardage attempts. I think that's something worth bearing in mind. So you're probably looking like Aaron Rodgers and Metcalf, Rodgers and maybe Jonnu, Rodgers and Austin is definitely in play. If you're going to a plus 2, I would completely ignore the running backs and probably ignore the tight ends and just go straight forward. Rodgers, Metcalf, Austin. Maybe you work one of the tight ends if you're building a bunch of those, in which case it would probably be Jonnu. But it continues to not be a good team. I think just one good offensive performance does not suddenly make this team much, much better for DFS. 23rd, 23 on DraftKings, 22, 21 is a stack on FanDuel. On the other side, Seattle, not all that much more appealing. Sammy Darnold just rates as QB 17 by points. You do get a solid points number on JSN. 11th by points and 13th by points. Slips a little bit in the point per dollar value ratings, but a heavily involved receiver. He caught 9 of 13 opportunities in week 1, put up 124 yards, 90.36% of the air yards. That's a ludicrous, unsustainable number unless they're just running the entire offense through this guy, which given this year's structure, they might. 13.7 yard average depth of target. Most of that is created by, obviously the depth of target, but the fact that he saw 13 opportunities where the next most targeted guy saw 3. So that's where you come away with that ludicrous spread of air yards. 10% of the air yards on 3 targets went in the direction of running mate Cooper Kupp in his Seattle debut. Wildly unimpressive start for Kupp. He caught 2 of those 3 passes for 15 yards on a 6.7 yard average depth of target. That was while playing 88% of the snaps and running a whole bunch of routes over that. Don't love the opportunity for Kupp, but he should be at least the second banana in this offense as far as the passing game goes. There's a running back split going on here. Zach Charbonnet gained 3.9 yards per rush attempt on 12 carries. Was not targeted in the passing game. Kenneth Walker had a disappointing 10 carries, 2 yards per rush attempt. Picked up a little bit of a look in 3 targets in the passing game. Came away with all 3 of them, but gained only 4 yards. That's a disaster of a situation until they have everything sorted out as far as who's getting those looks. Kenny Walker's not untalented, but if Charbonnet's taken away some of the chances, really limits him. 21st and 25th across both sites. Don't really pick up much in terms of value either. Torrey Horton played 54% of the snaps, ran a handful of routes, went untargeted for the game because everything was going to JSN, and they might do that again. Barner, mix and match quality tight end. He played 85% of the snaps, targeted twice. 1.5 yard average depth of target. Not a lot to work with there. Jake Bobo is a big-bodied target who they might look to in the red zone. In week 1, he was completely off the board. Eli Arroyo is just a clone of AJ Barner as far as what those chances are going to look like. Played just 31% of the snaps to Barner's 85%. If you go to this team, it's really skinny stacks of Darnold and JSN. They're going up against a Pittsburgh team that allowed 9.6 yards per pass attempt, 30th ranked in football last week to the Jets and Justin Fields. Darnold, JSN could go off a little bit here. Outside of that, not a lot to love from the Seattle side. I don't like this game all that much. Didn't like the Pittsburgh Jets game last week, and you saw what happened. Last game up, the depleted 49ers going up against a somewhat interesting New Orleans team. New Orleans, for their part, ranked 7th last week, allowing just 4.5 yards per pass attempt. Came away with 5 sacks on a 21.6% pressure rate. Now they're getting Mac Jones at the quarterback spot, thrust into a backup role with the injury to Brock Purdy. Jones, as we talked about at the very beginning of the show a few hours ago, hasn't been interesting since his rookie season back in 2021. Really limited. 8 touchdowns, 8 interceptions in 10 games last year. Limited for yardage. Not a good option at quarterback, but could get elevated a little bit and sees a nice value score as the QB7 by value because he's only 4,000 on DraftKings. If he's just dumping the ball off to Christian McCaffrey with the occasional opportunity for Ricky Pearsall and Juwan Jennings that gets converted, you can see an easy path to success, at least relative to that price. But does that become a slate winning score? Not necessarily. Going to have McCaffrey or whoever goes off with him in that lineup. Fortunately, McCaffrey looks pretty fantastic. RB2 across the board on DraftKings, 2-3 on FanDuel. He played 76% of the snaps last week, carried the ball 22 times, major volume contributor in the rushing game. Gained just 3.1 yards per rush attempt, though. There was some explosiveness on some plays, a lack of explosiveness on others. 2.2 yards before contact, just 1 yard per attempt after contact. The thing about McCaffrey is he's incredibly highly targeted in the passing game as well. Caught 9 of 10 opportunities in the pass game. So in a sport in which we're calling 20 potential touches the magic number for a running back, dude picked up 32 potential touches last week. He is just separated for those opportunities. It's like him and Saquon and few others for the just sheer volume that they draw. Highly priced for it, but obviously that number works as far as the value play given his very high projections across sites. He gained 73 yards on the passing, padded his scoring, just a 2-yard average depth of target, didn't score in either facet of the game, but incredibly heavily involved, and obviously a guy that we've seen score just a few touchdowns over the years. Ricky Pearsall, we'll see what it looks like. I was expecting Jennings to be more the true number 1 receiver here, but Pearsall out-targeted him 7-5 in week 1. Also drew more snaps, 84% snap share versus 66. Jennings is also banged up coming into this one, which diminishes the quality somewhat. Pearsall rates as wide receiver 20 by points and 17 by points, but leaps up to 7 and 10th by value. Still fairly priced, despite drawing 7 targets, turning that into 108 yards in a very productive day, and operating on a 19.4 yard average depth of target that was really significant, 58.3% of the air yards. Him and Jennings got down the field. Everybody else was pretty limited. 18% of the air yards went in Jennings' direction. Nobody else above even 10%. Question becomes, what does Mac Jones look like throwing the ball down the field to these guys? I think both of those dudes are talented receivers. Both of those guys are playable. But it probably renders this team better as McCaffrey standalone shares, Pearsall standalone shares, Jennings standalone shares, and then maybe a few darts for value around like a Brian Robinson as a backup running back with a little bit of potential. He carried the ball 9 times, gained just 3.7 yards per attempt, targeted twice in the offense, didn't score, but there's at least a little bit of involvement at a cheap price there. And then Jake Tongas should do the most of the operating at tight end, at least in terms of the pass attempts. Played 39% of the snaps versus Luke Farrell's 58%, but out-targeted Farrell 3-1 and scored a touchdown. Jake Tongas, yet another one of those touchdowns from week 1, the anonymous touchdowns that were scored. In between all those guys, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, MVS, limited, ranked in the 70s. He played 36% of the snaps last week, went untargeted over a handful of routes run. Should be in line for similar lack of production this week. Kendrick Bourne on this team now. Not available as of last check on the FanDuel slate, 3,500 on DraftKings. Unlikely to be overly involved, not a special player. Russell Gage not really on the radar despite playing 37% of the snaps, went untargeted in that role. As far as the backup running back role goes, I'm actually more intrigued talent-wise by Isaac Guerrero if something happens to Christian McCaffrey up top. But until something happens to Glass Legs up there, I think we just stick with McCaffrey and a few darts at Robinson because Guerrero is just not going to pick up the volume. But as a runner, he is actually the more talented of the backups. Maybe Kyle Juszczyk, for lack of George Kittle, gets an opportunity or two in the passing game. He picked up 2 targets last week. Was that him? Wait. Yeah, 2 targets last week, gained 32 yards. That's a Kyle Juszczyk kind of day. The fullback does get looks from time to time, especially when the lead tight end is out. 49% snap share last week. He's not going to ever be a standout. He's not going to ever be a reliable option, but as a cheapo dart throw to just fill a running back spot who maybe comes in, catches one in the end zone, he's at least on the board, just fell off the side of the cliff, clinging to it with his fingertips. On the New Orleans side, a still talented Alvin Kamara leads the way, 4.1 yards per rush attempt. Only carried the rock 11 times last week and only was targeted twice in the offense. That's very limited volume that we're used to from Alvin Kamara, but just kind of a limited overall team drags him down slightly. 9th and 8th running back on DraftKings, 11-17, where he's more expensive on the FanDuel slate relative to expected production. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, very talented wide receivers who both get down the field and go get the ball. They were both heavily targeted in the offense. 13 targets went in Olave's direction, despite coming off the field like 4 separate times. 9 targets went in Shaheed's direction. They turned that into 7 catches for 54 yards, 4.2 per target, and 6 catches for 33 yards, 3.7 per target. Neither guy scored. Part of that is due to the fact that Spencer Rattler is throwing them the ball. It's just not an NFL caliber quarterback. Rattler completed 59% of his 46 pass attempts, 214 yards, failed to throw a touchdown, but also didn't throw an interception. 4.7 yards per pass attempt is entirely unappealing. Juwan Johnson is a mixer at the tight end spot. He played a 99% snap share and was targeted 11 times in week 1. Came on an 8.1 yard average depth of target. He also failed to score, but he garnered a 30% air yard share, which for a tight end is significant. And Juwan Johnson has been a productive tight end in years past as far as coming down in the end zone with the ball. It's just another spot. You're just limited by Rattler. These are good receivers. Those are 3 good pass catchers. This is an excellent running back who is typically heavily involved in the passing game. This should be a better team if they had anybody else playing quarterback. Just a weak spot. Down depth chart, mix and match play on Kendry Miller as the backup running back. Behind the usual volume that Kamara would get, there's really no opportunity there. He played 15 snaps. He picked up 5 rush attempts. Did gain 4.8 yards per carry, which is kind of interesting. 2.4 yards before and after contact. Failed to do anything else noteworthy. Brandon Cooks, nothing more than a mixer, doesn't rate out well. Did play 76% of the snaps as the third banana in the wide receiver room. 4 targets, caught 3 of them for 26 yards. Just a 4.5 yard average depth of target for 6% of the air yards. Just not a significant option for a bad quarterback. It just winnows down your opportunity to actually score DFS points if you go to players like that. And then Devon Valet, not really rating out for anything. He was targeted twice, came away with 1 of them. 8 yard average depth of target makes him arguably maybe more interesting than Cooks. But given the volume split, given the snap share split, I would lean Cooks if you're absolutely desperate and you have to play one of those 2 because somebody's threatening your life. Everybody else, pretty limited down the board. Greg Biancone dropping into the room at the end of the show. Holy shit, almost 3 hours, he says. Yeah, 3-hour show. That's feels like good time for a football slate. We did a couple 4+ hour shows last season. Greg asking, what do you think about the Saints D at the minimum price this week? You weren't here for it, Greg. I celebrated the opportunity for the Saints defense earlier in the show. I put all the defenses on the board. All the defenses. I put all the defenses on the board. You can see they stand out. But this is your points column. That's your value column for each site. They're third on the points per dollar value on DraftKings at 2,500. They're first at 3,000 on the FanDuel slate by points per dollar. They're just 13th, so like halfway down the board as far as like actual projected fantasy points, but they gain a ton of ground, like you called out, for the low pricing, and they're playing against Mac Jones. They're playing against several of the backups here. It's a good opportunity for an adequate defense. That's not a bad defense either, especially against the pass, which could very much come into play here. They picked up 5 sacks in week 1, allowed just 4.5 yards per pass attempt. Could just lead to Christian McCaffrey day. They were gouged for 5.4 yards per rush attempt to rank 26th in week 1. There's your problem. But if they manage to bottle up McCaffrey on the idea that it's going to be really obvious that they're just giving McCaffrey the ball, and if they manage to find a couple sacks, bottle up Mac Jones, maybe come away with a pick even, you can see the path towards scoring. Probably going to get a little popular at those low prices, though, because it's no secret that San Francisco is dealing with a backup quarterback this week. But yeah, I like that shout out, and I appreciate the reminder here at the end of the show. That is the end of your football show, gang. 5:14, getting out at a reasonable hour for those of us who have to update baseball projections. Catch those in just a couple of minutes. I'll get all the confirmed lineups. I'll be in Discord as well if you guys want to chat about any of the opportunities for baseball. If you got other football questions that we didn't happen to cover on this show, I will be around through Discord all night long, really. Fortunately, the article is done, but definitely check out that article that I spent all night last night writing. It's the group's optimizers and stacks and game notes article up on the website right now. I gave you 20,000 plus words breaking down every single one of these players with some different stats thrown into the mix. A lot of what we talked about, a lot of the same takes, but give it to you in concrete format that you can digest after dinner, tomorrow morning when you're sitting on the bowl before you build lineups, whatever the case may be. It's going to take you a minute to read all those words, but give it a look. Took me longer to write it. Everything at Roto Scouts is under $1 a day, guys. That gets you access to football and baseball right now. Every single main slate for baseball, every single football game all year long. NBA, NHL right around the corner. Those are included for the same under $1 a day subscription fee. Weekly, monthly, quarterly plans are available. No commitment on a weekly, guys. Cost you less than $7 to get from, if you pick it up tomorrow morning, you get this week and next week, essentially, of football for $6.50 or whatever it is, under $1 a day. Give it a look. Check out a weekly plan. See if you like it. With that in mind, you guys, good luck out there on this slate tomorrow. Good luck in the baseball slate tonight. Somebody go win something. Let's get a significant NFL win on the board early this year. Share those results when you do at Roto Scouts on Twitter, in our free premium Discord, which is linked down in the description down there. On your way down to that, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you never have before. Give us a little love. Hype the video. That will help drive up the numbers. Definitely, especially for our main slate NFL marathon here, give this one a little bit of a hype so that other people can find us. Really appreciate every single one of you guys. Those of you who hung out for the entire show, those of you who are catching up on Rewind and hopefully like 3x speed the way I talk overnight tonight. Anybody listening tomorrow morning, best audience in the industry. Really appreciate you guys. Let's go get them this week. I will see you on Monday for shows, content through tonight and tomorrow. Later, gang.